business. When we talk about the commitment to new models and more importantly, commitment to the infrastructure to support that, what's the plan?
We're starting to see different kinds of hybrids that customers are excited about. E-revs, which go about 100 miles all electric, but then you can take a 700-mile trip once in a while. Those look really promising for a three-row crossover like Explorer. We're going very low end, super affordable EVs for urban duty cycles and for commercial. We're not going to invest in a lot of the very expensive crossovers for pure EV. We think that's going to be a hybrid business.
What does the supply chain look like specifically for the EV and hybrid business right now?
We've moved out our cycle plans. We focused on affordable and commercial. We're fortunate we moved 3 or 4 years ago, and we could tilt to hybrid and a specific kind of EV. And the supply chain has been able to move with us so far.
Don't miss the close live every weekday.
It's the world's second largest economy with a growing influence in global affairs. Bloomberg The China Show brings you the unmatched expertise you need to keep track of breaking news, in-depth market analysis, and the most influential newsmakers in and around China.
We need to do more to engage the market more. No risk on. I think we caught a little sweet spot.
Massive savings rate.
It's already a different game.
Bloomberg The China Show. Weekdays around the world, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute energy news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jemana Bersetti in Vienna, and this is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
All right, okay, ready?
David, what initially sparked your interest in this topic of longevity?
15 years ago, I turned 60, and I began to wonder how much longer I'm likely to live and what I could do to extend my life. On longevity, I talked with the leading experts in science and medicine to educate people about how they might be able to change their conduct so that they can live a happier and healthier life. I'm David Rubenstein. Join me on a 4-part journey as I explore the great quest for longevity. Only on Bloomberg.
All right, it's time now for top calls. Some of the analyst action in focus this morning. And first up, Caterpillar getting raised to a buy over at Evercore. The analysts over there say that the company is trying to reduce discontinuing in the fourth quarter, which would boost earnings. Shares up a little bit this morning. Next up, the data center energy company Vertiv is getting initiated with a sell rating over at GLJ Research. The analyst says that the stock is pricing in perfection. And good news, we'll sit down with the CEO next hour. Finally, Palo Alto is getting upgraded to over at Bank of America to a buy after what the firm calls an impressive performance on all fronts in its fourth quarter. Also good news, we'll talk to the CEO next hour, Matt Miller.
We talk to a lot of CEOs on this program. That's the point. So I'm looking forward to those 2 interviews. We've been discussing the U.S. government's potential 10% stake in Intel using the CHIPS Act as equity. Bloomberg tech editor Peter Elstrom joins us now from London to try and sort through this complicated and fascinating story, Peter. So my main concern, because I'm from Licking County, Ohio, is that, they have the cash they need, the capital to build this giant fab, I guess, in between.
Hello, this is DrPaulCottrell, and I'm doing a live stream on August 19th. We're live streaming on Rumble, on YouTube, on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and simulcasting on X Spaces. If you have a question or you'd like to give me your opinion on what is being covered, please join X Spaces on my X channel, and you can ask for the mic. You'll be live on the show. You can also type it in the chat. Thank you for joining. I greatly appreciate it. Please help support the work that I do by donating on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee on the homepage. You can also be a paid member to my Patreon channel. I produce these videos for free to inform you on how the market is emerging throughout the news day. So please help support the work by donating. Share the links, ask your social media to follow me, and take a look at the great products that I offer. I have ebooks, I have supplements, and I have course material on immunology and pulmonology that you can learn from. So please take a look at my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. The link is in the description of this video and all my videos. What we're going to go to now is BBC talking about Trump says he has spoken to Putin to arrange the Zelensky meeting.
Working for me 24/7. But the truth is, I've got
The US President Donald Trump says that he has spoken with Vladimir Putin about the next steps in his efforts to end the war in Ukraine, and he's hoping to arrange a meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian presidents. Well, the Kremlin has now confirmed a 40-minute phone call between Trump and Putin, during which both leaders discussed the possibility of continuing direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. So far, no date or location has been set for a potential meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelensky, but French President Emmanuel Macron has suggested the talks take place in Switzerland with the involvement of European leaders. Well, all this follows talks at the White House on Monday between President Trump, President Zelensky, and key European leaders. Those talks included discussions on future security guarantees for Ukraine, with possible US involvement if a peace deal is reached. President Zelensky said that he's ready to meet President Putin, but stressed that Ukraine must have protections in place once the war ends. While posting on social media, here's what President Trump said about security guarantees for Ukraine. Guarantees will be provided by the various European countries with a coordination from the USA. At the conclusion of the meetings, President Trump said that he called President Putin and began the arrangements for a meeting at a location to be determined between President Putin and President Zelensky. After that meeting takes place, we'll have a trilateral, which would be the two presidents plus myself. So we'll have analysis from our correspondents around the world. But first, this report from Arunade Mukherjee in Washington.
Together and navigating a complex path to peace in what was a day of extraordinary diplomacy at the White House. All smiles amidst an air of positivity. A marked change from President Zelensky's last visit 6 months ago, which ended in a heated exchange.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for your attention and thank you very much for your efforts. Personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you.
Loads of thanks and some light humor over the Ukrainian leader's suit this time, given how he had chosen that over the usual fatigues after being criticized last time.
President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah.
I said to the one that attacked you last time. I remember.
Yeah, I apologize to you. You look wonderful.
As the European leaders joined in, President Zelensky hailed the talks to be the best conversation yet with Donald Trump. Europe and the UK will be key to any NATO-style agreement that they would all rally to defend Ukraine in the future. Conversations largely centered on what security guarantees Ukraine would be given and the level of US's involvement.
There's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
But later on, in a post on Truth Social, Mr. Trump's offer for help was explained as, quote, coordination from the US, making the exact same nature of help from the US still unclear.
What shall we do when the war is over? Protection after the end of the war. It is very important that the United States of America sending the signal that they will be among those countries who will help and who will coordinate, and that they'll be participating in the security guarantees for Ukraine, which is a huge step forward.
President Trump says he is now working to arrange a bilateral meeting between the two countries at war and then a possible trilateral meeting after that with him present. Speaking to the BBC after the talks, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said he was pleased with the outcomes of yesterday's meetings.
So a real breakthrough on security guarantees. This is something that's been needed for a long time, very important for security back in the United Kingdom, as well as across wider Europe. And then secondly, moving on with the bilateral meeting and then trilateral meeting between the presidents and the second one, including President Trump. That is in order to try to get to an outcome of peace that is lasting and that is just.
As President Trump tries to project himself as the leader who is trying to get peace deals done around the world, That remained the crux of the conversations all through yesterday, with European leaders complimenting his efforts in trying to resolve the conflict. In the absence of a ceasefire, leaders know they are racing against the clock to get a peace deal done. Until that happens, the military onslaught on the ground is expected to continue. Arunodaya Mukherjee, BBC News, Washington.
Well, just hours after those peace talks wrapped up in Washington, Russia launched a series of overnight attacks on cities across Ukraine. Over 270 drones and 10 missiles. That's according to Ukraine's air forces. It's a reminder of the reality for millions of people there living through an active war. Ukraine's foreign minister says that the overnight attacks show it's critical to end the killing and ensure security guarantees. Our correspondent Katie Watson has more from Kyiv.
270 drones launched.
Hey, I heard you're concerned. I'm a huge fan. Hey, what is your #1 tip for saving money? Easy. Pay off your credit card debt as soon as possible. And
270 drones launched into Ukraine overnight, as well as missiles. Now, most of those were intercepted, but still, we're talking 16 different locations that were hit. In Donetsk, there were several strikes that killed at least 5 people over the last 24 hours. There have been strikes in other parts of the country that have taken out power supplies. And that's what President Zelensky has said all along, that there is a war raging here. Russia needs to stop the killing. There needs to be this ceasefire before there can be, negotiations about a future peace deal. And people here in Ukraine, that's absolutely what people here feel. People who are watching, waking up every single day to learn of new strikes. And of course they can hear the sirens as well across the country warning them about that. So they're very much living every single day an active war, and they want to see a stop to that before negotiating further.
Katie Watson there in Kyiv. Well, our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse, who's at the moment in Brussels, well, he says that Donald Trump seems committed to a permanent deal rather than a temporary ceasefire.
He doesn't see the point in it if it's going to be flimsy, if it's going to be broken. He wants a lasting agreement. Europe has, I think, played 2 characters here. It has nodded along saying, okay, we agree with your vision, because it has to, but it's also reiterated its preference for there to be a ceasefire. Not least because that equates, despite these peace endeavours, despite this direction of travel seemingly towards a one-on-one meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, which the Kremlin has yet to confirm, I think with the war still being hot, if you like, going into that, there are question marks over how constructive it could be. How could Volodymyr Zelensky sit opposite the architect of a 12-year campaign of aggression and 3.5-year full-scale war and try and thrash out a common ground when cities continue to be terrorised, as you've seen in the case of last night, by hundreds more drones. So that's difficult to imagine. Nevertheless, it is this type of format where difficult discussions take place, where you have 2 adversaries in the same room. It is that kind of format where some kind of blueprint for peace, and a lasting one, is thrashed out. But there are so many gaps in detail in terms of what American security guarantees could mean. Does it mean boots on the ground? Does it mean ammunition, intelligence, or all of the above? And to what extent Europe can provide a meaningful security guarantee with their own military capabilities. There are big questions, and it's all about how the Kremlin reacts to what Europe hopes will be a shared proposal with the United States.
James Waterhouse there. So we're getting a lot of reaction from the countries that took part in Monday's White House meeting. The Finnish Prime Minister, for example, is saying that the meeting between Trump and Zelensky was a very important step. And in about an hour or so, the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, will chair a virtual meeting along with the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, of the Coalition of the Willing, to brief leaders on the outcomes of those Washington talks and also to discuss next steps. The coalition, which includes the UK, France and Germany, is a group of nations that have pledged to help safeguard peace in Ukraine once it is achieved. So let's cross over to Westminster. Our political correspondent Joe Pike joins us live now. So Joe, what more do we know about this virtual meeting that Sir Keir Starmer is co-hosting with Emmanuel Macron?
Well, Kasia, it's due to start in about an hour's time, although Keir Starmer's only landed back in the UK in the last half hour or so. So he's quickly moving on to the next political commitment of his pretty busy day. I think this is pretty clearly a download debriefing session between various European and Commonwealth leaders. Not everybody in the coalition of the willing was, of course, at the White House yesterday. So I'm sure Keir Starmer, as the chair of today's meeting, even though he's the co-chair of the coalition alongside Emmanuel Macron, will be putting his view across as to the next steps. The big unknown here, firstly, does seem to be, as James Waterhouse touched on, what US involvement in security guarantees will actually be, even though Donald Trump has committed to them. And on that point, we're expecting UK officials to arrive in the States today to start detailed talks about the US's role. So I'm sure that will be fed into today's meeting. A lot of other challenges, and the big unknown, I suppose, aside from the details of security guarantees, Kasia, is what Vladimir Putin does next. My understanding from talking to UK government sources in the last few hours seems to be that European nations have decided to, for now, go all in on Donald Trump's peace process, be seen as supportive as possible. That's certainly what we heard in the White House yesterday. And I suppose the strategy seems to be, if it goes wrong or falls apart, well, Donald Trump is not able to blame any European nation or Kyiv either. And also, certainly,
breaking news, President Trump rules out sending U.S. troops to Ukraine despite expressing openness to the idea during the talks with Zelensky.
The government sources hoping that Volodymyr Zelensky is now in a better negotiating position after yesterday's meeting, both because of those security guarantees, but also because Donald Trump didn't ask him, on camera at least, to talk about territory and land.
Okay, Joe, we'll keep an eye on as and when that summit or meeting takes place, a virtual meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. Thank you so much, Joe Pike, our political correspondent, joining us from Westminster. Joe saying that meeting, in theory, starting in around an hour's time. We'll bring you all the very latest lines on that. Now, Michael Galler is a German member of the European Parliament and the current chair of its Committee on Foreign Affairs. And he told me that a ceasefire is a necessary step in negotiations aimed at ending the war in Ukraine.
I think that is one of these.
When you get in your car, you just need to put your location in the trip planner. It recommends where you need to stop, for how long, park, plug in, and
I think that is one of these problems that remain after this meeting, which of course avoided an escalation like we saw before, and Trump saw that Zelensky is not alone. But the point is the consistency of American positioning. We all recall that he was saying some time ago, well, in 50 days there must be a ceasefire, otherwise we have sanctions, and he shortened this whole period. And then after meeting in Alaska, all of a sudden, apparently Putin convinced him not to have a ceasefire. I think a ceasefire is necessary because it proves whether or not Russia is at all willing to embark on a process of negotiations towards ending the war. And I think there is no clarity whatsoever to the contrary. As we spoke yesterday when we saw the leaders arriving, the air raid started in Kiev and other cities. So that remains to be seen whether there is willingness on the Russian side.
So that was Michael Galler, a German member of the European Parliament. Just a line coming in from Volodymyr Zelensky himself. He's been posting on social media on the X platform saying that yesterday important talks took place in Washington with the president and with European leaders. He says that this was a truly significant step towards ending the war, ensuring the security of Ukraine and our people. We're already working on the concrete content of the security guarantees. Today we continue coordination at the level of leaders. There'll be discussions, and we're preparing for the relevant formats. We'll continue working tomorrow. National security advisors are also in constant contact now. There will be security guarantees. And just adding that he thanks all the partners for their determination and support. Ukraine feels this strength. We'll do everything to make the path to peace a reality through partnership, through security guarantees, and through the courage of the Ukrainian people. Those security guarantees are a little bit vague at the moment, but we know Finland is calling for the US to back up those security guarantees. And when Zelensky talks about the courage of the Ukrainian people. 270 drones fell overnight from Russia into Ukraine, 10 missiles as well. So the react.
All right. Let me give you an update on the market. The S&P 500 is trading at 6,445. VIX is trading at 14. Euro is trading at 1.16. Oil is trading at 61.99. BITO is trading at 20.84. Bitcoin is trading at 115,000. Japanese yen is trading at 147.61. Natural gas is trading at 2.76. And oil is trading at 28.14. All right, so let's go over some of the resistance and support levels. The S&P 500's near-term resistance level is 6,500. If you've been noticing, it's been below that, and it's just hovering just below. So that's a resistance level. If we start hearing some positive news in terms of the Fed rate cut, positive tariff news, maybe even peace with Ukraine, that could all be positive for the S&P 500. Now, the support level is, if it fails and we start to have a little bit of a drawdown on the S&P 500, the support level is 6,250. Now, BITO ETF that's longing Bitcoin, Bitcoin's trading at 115,000. It was trading at about 120 just recently and then dropped back down. So that, with BITO trading at 20.86, you have a resistance level at 2149 and a support level at 20. Now, Bitcoin may continue to go down a little bit. There seems to be some issues in the news that I don't know the details on, where BlackRock bought some of Strategy. I think they bought about 5% of the company. And there's some discussion about, will they fork a coin off of Bitcoin and all this stuff. So I think people are going to be shorting Strategy, for at least in the near term, which is a company that's heavily investing into Bitcoin. So there may be some, that may be causing some of the Bitcoin to be selling off a little bit. All right, oil. Now, oil is trading at almost 62. It's trading at $62 a barrel for WTI. I think what's happening is you have more supply on the market from OPEC Plus. You have industrial demand is slightly, maybe a little less than expected, or just hovering. There's not a big industrial demand. And you also have the issue in Ukraine. Now, I think what Trump did was he talked to the Saudis and asked MBS to suppress the price of Brent. That way, Russia can't sell on the black market to China and to India as much oil for a profitable price. For example, if Brent is trading at $70 a barrel and Russia is being sanctioned, but you have countries with ghost ships getting the oil from Russia, Russia could be selling at, let's say, $60 a barrel. But if Brent is trading at 65, then Russia's going to have to sell the oil at a lower cost. So it's less money for the war effort. So I think that that's a big part of the problem. I noticed that when the summit was taking place on Friday, it looked like the oil wanted to go up a little bit. And also during the meetings at the White House yesterday, oil wanted to go up a little bit. Now the current trading range now is $60 for the low end for WTI, and the upper bound is 65. So you have a resistance at 65 and a support level at 60. But this is heavily involving event risk, especially with Russia. Now, if we get bad economic data, oil will probably start trying to break that $60 support level and start trading at about 59, 58. Now, natural gas is trading at 2.759. Now, about 3-4 weeks ago, it was trading above 3, around 3.2, 3.3. There was a trading range that I was looking at that was around 3.1 or 3.2 as a low end, all the way up to 3.8. Now that trading range is looking like around 2.7 to maybe 3. So we have a resistance level at 3 for natural gas, and we have a support level at about 2.5. Now, many energy analysts are saying that the 2.7, 2.6 for natural gas is probably the bottom, and then it's going to slowly start to creep up in Q4 back to about the 2.3, 2, or not 2.3, 3.2 or maybe 3.3, 3.4 range for millions of British thermal units. So natural gas is probably a time to actually accumulate shares for the upcycle in Q4. Now, TYD, which is an ETF that trades the belly of the curve for treasuries, U.S. treasuries, it's the 7 to the 10-year treasury. Now, the 10-year treasury is trading at 4.3 for yield. 10-year treasury is trading at 4.34 for the yield. Now, TYD, which is the ETF, is trading at 25.07. So we have a support level at 25.02, and we have a resistance level for TYD at 25.87. Now, how TYD works is that if yields go down, bond prices go up, TYD ETF would go up. So it's directly correlated to the price of the bond. If the Federal Reserve lowers rates, then the curve, the yield curve for the different maturities is most likely going to start to shift down. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to shift down in equal amounts. It doesn't mean that they're going to shift down at exactly the same time. But over time, that curve is going to shift parallel down. Now, what that means for the belly of the curve is that if the Federal Reserve is lowering rates, that the 7 and a 10-year yield most likely will trade lower. Now, if the Federal Reserve does their rate cut this year, some people are saying in September, some people are saying in October. I think it'll be in October. And I think it'll be a 1/4 point. But if the Federal Reserve does lower a 1/4 point or a 1/2 point, then it's going to affect the belly of the curve and yields will start to go down. And instead of trading at 4.3, I wouldn't be surprised that it starts trading at 4.1. So that would mean that TYD will go up. So keep in mind with that price action with the Treasury, especially with the Federal Reserve potentially lowering rates this year. All right, with that said, let's go back to some of the breaking news here. I want to listen into individuals talking about their projection for Bitcoin. This is on CNBC.
time, crypto investors and policymakers gathering in Jackson Hole this week for the second annual Wyoming Blockchain Symposium. It's hosted by Salt and Creighton. And joining us right now, first on CNBC, Anthony Scaramucci, founder and managing partner of Skybridge Capital. Smart to do this almost as a shoulder event to Fed Chair Jay Powell.
That was the plan. That was the plan, Andrew. And interestingly enough, under the Biden administration, no Fed officials accepted the invitation last year. But under the Trump administration, we've got 3 or 4 of them, including Fed Governor Waller, coming. So we're very excited about that. We've got a gathering of about 500 people, lots of C-suite people here. So we're hoping to make this an annual event.
You just mentioned one of the names that may be a potential Fed chair. Before we get into the crypto side of things, do you have a take on the next Fed chair? We just had Scott Besson on. He said he's going to be conducting interviews post-Labor Day with a group that may be as many as 11 right now, but sounds like some of the guests that are at your event may be on that list.
Well, I think there might be 1 or 2, but I'm really, to me, I obviously outside of that decision-making authority, and listen, I mean, President Trump picked Jerome Powell 8 years ago. I think the chairman did generally a very good job. It's an imperfect process, of course. Not saying that mistakes weren't made, but he's done a generally good job, and I expect the president to pick another good Fed chair when the time comes.
You're long Bitcoin. No wonder you love him, Matt.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Anthony. Interestingly, a dovish chair is good for your business. It's good for crypto, right?
Well, listen, I want the mama bear chair. I don't necessarily think a dovish chair is good, because if you get an overheating in inflation, you're going to disrupt all of the ways that we consume. We're going to disrupt the housing market, which you guys were just talking about. I would prefer mama bear. I think Bitcoin specifically is going to be fine in any scenario, but I like the mama bear Fed. So hopefully the president will pick the mama bear.
How are you thinking about Bitcoin right now? We're looking at the price tag right about $115,000. We've had conversations probably when Bitcoin was at $15,000. Right now, in your mind, what's the window? What's the base case, and how high can it go from here?
I mean, listen, there's been pain and euphoria in the Bitcoin markets over the last 5 years. I think what's happening now is lots of consolidation and institutional adoption. So if you went to a conference like this 3 years ago, it was mostly retail investors and CEOs working in the layer 1 blockchain space. Today, it's lots more institutional investors. So that's finally starting to happen. If you look at the numbers on something like the BlackRock ETF, the IBIT ETF, you can see now, Andrew, there's lots of institutions coming in. So what's interesting is that some of the whales have been selling. So I know I've seen your interviews with Michael Novogratz and the 80,000 Bitcoins that sold last month. And so there's a consolidation story happening. There's a change of ownership story happening. But I think we're going higher just because you just look at the math. There's just way more demand than issued supply of Bitcoin or existing overall supply in the marketplace. So we still maintain our price target between 180 and 200,000 by year end, and I think that's a cautious price target. By the way, I think there are people that are way above us those levels, but I just think it's a function of.
I've been watching it very carefully, and what it does is it seems like it'll go up 10,000 and then drop back down, and then go up 10 more thousand, and drop down a little bit, and then go up. So it's like a seesaw, right? But moving upward. So it's not monotonic. There's an undulation, but it is moving upward. So if you add in those undulations, and we're talking about, we're mid-August now. So every 3 weeks, maybe every 3 or 4 weeks, there's a new level, but then it comes back down, and then there'll be another level. You count that out, and you're talking about maybe 160, not 180 or 200. I'd be surprised if Bitcoin goes to 200 by the year end. I'd be very surprised at that. Now, My target for the S&P 500 is 6,800 to 7,000. Bitcoin seems to be correlated to the S&P 500 and is highly correlated to the Mag 7. So if the Mag 7 continues to go up, yes, Bitcoin will continue to go up. But if they start to falter and let's say CapEx for different companies, especially in the realm of AI, starts to slow down in their investment, then that's going to be a bellwether for the Mag 7s to actually start to sell off, right? So if Bitcoin is correlated to the Mag 7, there's no way it's going to go to 200 by year end. I mean, think about that. To go to 200 by year end, it has to go up like $85,000 like coin. That's not going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. Now, I could be wrong. I mean, but I just, plus this issue with strategy and BlackRock and, you know, and then you add in the correlation between the Mag 7. I'm not so sure. I think that's way over optimistic. 160, I think 155, maybe. I think, but it could stay at 130 by year end.
$450 Bitcoins being made by the network per day.
How do you feel about buying Bitcoin directly these days versus folks buying ETFs versus folks buying, you know, some of the products that Michael Saylor is selling, for example?
Now, my take on this. My take on this is that you can buy a fraction of a coin. You can buy it, you know, buy Bitcoin. I prefer to buy ETFs because when you look at that whole ETF world, you can get leverage out of the ETF. So you're buying on leverage, and you can create strategies where you can buy and sell. So you can buy an ETF that buys Bitcoin that's long, or you can short it. It's harder in the spot market for Bitcoin to do that. You can, but it's just harder to do. It's harder to short Bitcoin, right? Just short it, right? Because it'd have to be to another currency. And usually that's on a margin, and you can get a margin call. And there's a lot of, it's harder. So it can be done, but it's a lot harder. But if you play the ETF game, you get more specificity. You can calibrate your trades better. And that's the reason why I look at these ETFs. And there are a lot of them out there. Now, BITO is longing Bitcoin, and BITI shorts Bitcoin. So you can create these complex strategies. Problem is that those are leveraged, and you get leverage decay. So you can't hold the position for very long, because if you do, you start to lose that volatility. So the way those ETFs work is it's playing with the volatility. So if Bitcoin doesn't move fast, those ETFs don't move. It's when you have big price moves, either up or down, where you get the action in the ETF.
They're all linked to Bitcoin, IBIT being the purest link to Bitcoin. I think what Michael has done is absolutely extraordinary, as evidenced by all of the copycats that are out there. And again, not just copycats for Bitcoin, but for Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, and others. And so it's different strokes for different folks. Michael, you're probably getting a little bit more of a kick to your Bitcoin exposure. IBIT, I think it's a pure play, and I would just point out that places like JP Morgan will actually lend on IBIT, and so it's a very secure asset that people trust. I own a lot of Bitcoin and hold it in storage, and Andrew, for myself and for Skybridge. And so there's different ways to approach it. I think the institutions will likely go into the ETFs. And of course, there's a lot of institutions that quote unquote can't own Bitcoin, that they end up owning Michael stock or synthetics like that.
And where do you land right now in the stablecoin arena? We've had Mr. Allaire on recently from Circle. That's really the way people are playing that in the public market at this moment. But there's a whole bunch of new stablecoin companies coming into the public market. And I keep wondering sort of how that all shakes out longer term. That feels different to me than what's happening with either Bitcoin as a currency or Ethereum or whatnot.
Well, I mean, and also,
you know what's interesting? What is interesting with
well,
that?
I mean, and also the state
What's
of
interesting
Wyoming.
with that commercial? It was a crypto commercial, right? But you had that deep bass and that hip hop kind of sound. See, it's almost like it tries to. It's not refined like, let's say, classical music, right? Jazz or something like that. It's more that hip hop, deep bass, trying to get you to like step in line and just just follow. There's a reason why if you watch like soldiers marching, right? And there's a cadence. This is a similar cadence to this hip hop bass sound. So if crypto is playing this kind of music, it's almost trying to create an emotional response where you should be a follower. All right. They use that music on purpose for crypto, for sure.
Is announcing this morning
Yes.
their own stable coin, so you can add that to the mix as well. Congratulations to the state. I just think that that's generally good. I share Secretary Desson's view of this, that's generally good for the U.S. dollar. It means more treasuries, more short-term treasuries, demand for those securities. But I also think it's going to bring a wave of technological innovation. We at our last conference in Bermuda, we did a drop of stable coins into people's phones where they could spend, I guess it was $100 at the different tourist shops on Front Street in Bermuda, and it worked beautifully. And I think you're going to get to the point where we're transacting using stable coins. It may bypass some of the credit card fees and some of the other ancillary third-party confirmation fees that we've charged historically in the marketplace. So I generally think it's very good. I think those companies will consolidate. And I think one of the discussions here at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium is going to be about a central bank digital currency. And I stand with President Trump on that. I don't think we need that. I think it could be, from a libertarian perspective, too intrusive from a privacy matter. And I think the private companies are doing a great job in this area. And so I'd like to just stay in the private company realm, right, as it relates to dollar-based stablecoins.
So he was talking about he was talking about IBIT. I don't trade IBIT, but IBIT is a long for Bitcoin. All right, it doesn't have an inverse ETF, so you can't do a complex hedging strategy. In addition, it doesn't pay a dividend. Some of these complex hedging strategies, other ETFs, do pay dividends. All right, so they don't pay a dividend yield, and you can only long it. All right, now you could have the ability in your trading account to short IBIT directly, but that you can get a margin call on that. So it's not necessarily the greatest way to play it.
In this context, on the stable coins, is if everybody's playing in this, how much margin is there really, right? And therefore, in the stable coin arena.
Well, remember, they're not allowed, because if you look at the last legislation, there's no yield on the stable coins, Andrew. So if you're converting dollars into a stable coin, there's going to be a spread there for those guys naturally. I don't think the competition is going to impact that unless we switch up that yield mechanism.
Let me ask you a different question, and maybe it's a political question, but it's a business question. You obviously had your couple of minutes.
I never talk politics, Andrew. That's I'm not.
You never talk politics.
Not in politics anymore. But go ahead. I can take a political question.
He tweets it. He podcasts it. He does all of that. I'm just curious if you just weigh in on the sort of larger industrial policy question in terms of the way the country is moving. We're talking about Intel. We were talking about NVIDIA earlier and the AMD deal, and whether you look at all of this and you think of it as a very positive, affirmative approach, the way the country should be dealing with these things, or you look at them as shakedowns for corporate leaders. Which one is it these days for you?
I think it's really important. I think it's really important for the United States to build its economic clustering and to use tariffs as a means to force these companies that have been playing labor arbitrage and regulatory arbitrage to have higher margins for the last 35 years. I was born and raised in Detroit. I know a lot about manufacturing. I spent a lot of time in automotive, all right? Automotive was hurt radically by the shipping of its economic cluster because of NAFTA. And it first happened with moving it to Windsor, Canada. And then the next hit was moving operations to Mexico. And then the hit after that, after 2000, was favored status for China. So to have a economic, vibrant country, we have to bring back manufacturing. Now let's see what this hedge fund clown that has a law degree has to say.
Developing such a good relationship with Joe Kernan, I almost don't want to answer the question, but I am going to answer the question.
We don't love everything. We don't love everything, but we certainly didn't vote for Kamala, or at least speaking for myself.
Let him answer the question.
All right. Well, I'm going to answer the question. I appreciate surgical tariffs where we need to protect our private companies against government-sponsored companies overseas that are dumping into our markets. So I'm all about that. I don't like the massive macro tariffs. I think they're long-term damaging. I think the companies have exhausted their ability to absorb the prices of those tariffs.
No, he's wrong. He's wrong. He's wrong. Obviously, he's never engineered anything in his life. It's obvious. He probably can't fix his own toilet. He probably can't put up his own drywall in his house. He probably can't even paint his kitchen. All right? This is the problem with people that are trying to make decisions for the rest of the country. Economic clustering adds to the GDP. Economic clustering leads to skills in all categories for all ages, including the older worker and the younger worker. When you get rid of your economic clustering, you get rid of economic mobility. When you get rid of your economic clustering, you get rid of the tax base in the cities. It's not a mistake or just an aberration when a city loses its economic clustering and then all of a sudden the water isn't so good. The quality of the water or the quality of the city services. And the city starts to decay. The roads start to decay. Because there's less of a tax base. Because people left. People don't have higher paying jobs because the economic clustering went to Canada or Mexico or China or Vietnam. The main reason why Flint, Michigan had so many problems with its water was because GM left. The money left. The economic clustering left. When a major manufacturer leaves, all those peripheral industries leave too. Some of them are mom and pop shops, others are tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. So we're supposed to just keep globalization going while we erode our economic cluster in the United States? Because when you do that, the people that make money are the transnational capitalists. He's a transnational capitalist. He makes money on pushing paper, pushing digits. He doesn't care about the economic clustering in the United States. And this is the problem that we have with these people that are on these shows. They're not engineers, never have been, never will be. All right, let's go to let's listen to the U.S. Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. Oh, before we do that,
same old phone? No.
Let me just do a product plug here. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the C60. C60 is a very potent antioxidant. It's part of my anti-aging protocol. And by using C60, you're going to slow down the aging process, improve your endocrine system, improve your immune system. Now, you're going to also improve your cardiovascular system. Now, C60 you can get in in extra virgin olive oil, in avocado oil, or in MCT coconut oil. Now, C60 needs to be in an oil because the carbon molecules, 60 carbons connected together, looks like a soccer ball. It'll soak up free radicals, but that molecule has to be in a lipid for you to absorb it properly. All right, it's lipid soluble. So it's really important to understand that C60 has to be in a lipid. If you take C60 that's in a powder form, that's the wrong way to do it, by far, the wrong way. It has to be in a lipid. So by taking C60, a teaspoon a day, on an empty stomach preferably, you're going to be able to absorb it better. And what it does is it's going to soak up free radicals. It's very potent. It's hundreds of times, if not 1,000 times, more effective than one molecule of vitamin C. Because a molecule of vitamin C will neutralize one free radical. C60 can neutralize hundreds, if not 1,000 free radicals. Just one molecule. The reason being is that these carbon molecules are connected. It's because of the valence electron shell of the carbon, and other carbons are connected and they share electrons, and it kind of just shimmers. These electrons just move around, and by doing that, it can neutralize those free radicals. Now, with C60, what happens is that it's going to soak up those free radicals, neutralize them, so it's not causing damage to your cells or your tissues. It's going to soak up free radicals in your vascular system to prevent oxidizing LDL. Because when you have LDL that's oxidized, it causes plaque formation. So if you're soaking up the free radicals that's causing oxidized LDL, you're not getting plaque. So that's the reason why it helps with your cardiovascular. Now, it'll help your immune system and your endocrine system to get into homeostasis. It'll help with your neurons. It'll help the mitochondrial health in the neuron. Because by soaking up free radicals in a cell, including a neuron, because a neuron is a cell, you're improving the health of the mitochondria. And when you're improving the health of the mitochondria, that means you have more ATP and more energy. And one major reason why people age is that you're rusting. faster. You're oxidizing faster. You're creating more free radicals. If you're soaking those up, you're slowing down the aging process and you're boosting up your energy levels. So what's a common feature of people aging? They have aches and pains and they have less energy. Well, if you bring down inflammation, if you soak up those free radicals, if you reduce the stress on the tissues, if you improve your immune system so it can heal, if you improve your endocrine system, your body is going to work better. And you're going to slow down the aging process. So when you have more ATP in your cells, the cells will have a higher metabolism. It will work better. Cells that don't have ATP don't work so well, including neurons. So as these neurons are improving with the health of the mitochondria, and you're soaking up those free radicals and reducing the stress, the myelin sheath is improving, the chemical signal is better, you'll have more neurotransmitters, you'll think faster, you'll have better memory, and you'll have this positive neuroplasticity when you do this on a regular basis. So taking C60 is super important for all of your organ systems because it is a very strong antioxidant. I've been taking C60 since 2016 every day. Now take a teaspoon a day, every day. Preferably on an empty stomach. If you work out, take it before the workout, and it's going to soak up the free radicals you generate during the workout, and you'll notice that you're recovering quicker. Because if you have a buildup of free radicals and you're not neutralizing them, it's causing damage to your tissues. If you look at someone that overworks out and they're not taking anti-inflammatory supplements, bringing down pro-inflammatory cytokines, and if they're not soaking up free radicals, they age faster. So people think, well, if you just run a marathon and you don't take the right supplementation, the right antioxidants, the right anti-inflammatory supplements, people think, oh, if you just run a marathon and you're athletic and you don't take supplements, that you'll be fine. No, that's not true, because you're building up free radicals while you're working out. And this is the reason why that if you overwork out and you're not eating properly, because there's antioxidants in certain types of foods, but also taking higher doses of supplementation and stacking them the proper way, if you overwork out, you're speeding the aging process. Case in point, you look at these super athletes, right? Like the Tour de France types, and you look at them after they retire, all right? So they're in their prime, at age 23, 24, 25, maybe 27, all right? And then they start to decline. And you look at them when they're in their 40s, huge difference. They've aged a lot. And this is the point I'm making, is that there is such a thing as overworking out, especially if you're not taking higher doses of those supplements that will bring down inflammation and soak up those free radicals. So you can take lessons learned from sports medicine. You can take lessons learned from geriatric medicine and apply it to your health, and notice that with the proper diet and exercise and the way you stack your supplements will lead to slowing down the aging process and heal your body. Not just slow down the aging process, you're healing your body. That's the whole point. So please go to my store, blood-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the C60. Make sure you take it every day, a teaspoon a day. And it stacks really well with NAD+, ubiquinol, resveratrol, clarity factor, and other supplements that I'll be talking about throughout this broadcast. But it works. And you'll notice that for certain people, other things in your body that just that have been problematic for you, sometimes goes away. A lot of people that have a vision issue will notice that their vision starts to improve over time. Now, what is vision? It's really the nervous system, all right? I mean, there's some mechanical aspects to the eye and all this, but the the retina and the signaling, that's the nervous system. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, use discount 5 and you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last. But get the C60, very high quality antioxidant. And if you pay attention to my protocol, you will get healthy. All right, let's continue.
Upgrade to the new Galaxy Z Fold 7.
Let's talk more about the possibility of this government stake with the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who joins us, I believe, this morning from Washington. Morning, Mr. Secretary. Good to see you. Good morning. Nice to see you guys. Can you help us understand sort of the calculus behind this move?
Sure. So for national security, we need to make our own chips here. We cannot rely on Taiwan, which is 9,500 miles away from us and only 80 miles from China. So you can't have 99% of leading edge chips made in Taiwan. We want to make them here. So that's a key part of our initiative. That's part of the deal we did with Japan. That's part of the deal we did with Korea, to have the infrastructure and economic capacity to build those chips in America. And of course, one of those pieces is it would be lovely to have Intel be capable of making a U.S. node or a U.S. transistor, driving that in America. That would be lovely. That's not necessary, but as I said, that would be a really good thing to have, would be American participant in the semiconductor space.
So, Mr. Secretary, how do you view then the CHIPS Act funds that have yet to be committed but have been promised, and the idea that that might be then converted to an equity stake? Is that how we should view it, that ultimately that's what you're talking to Intel about right now?
Yes. I mean, the president figures out that America should get the benefit of the bargain. I mean, that is exactly Donald Trump's perspective, which is, why are we giving a company worth $100 billion this kind of money? What are in it for the American taxpayer? And the answer Donald Trump has is, we should get an equity stake for our money. So we'll deliver the money, which was already committed under the Biden administration. We'll get equity in return for it, get a good return for the American taxpayer, instead of just...
I think it's very important, especially for our key industries like semiconductor industry and the electronics, especially when it comes to defense, to make it more stable and domestic. All right. Now, Intel used to be a darling company, right? But they're having problems. Now, they probably weren't paying attention to what was going on with these GPUs, and they were more focused on CPUs. But it's important to keep them afloat, to help them build fabs in the United States, because they are going to be a major player in the future economy. It's not just going to be in NVIDIA. We're going to need Intel. We're going to need AMD. We're going to need chips from Taiwan. And the more domestic manufacturing that we have, the better. And not just that, the more fabs that we create in the United States, the more that these kids that are coming out of college, either in chemistry or in computer science or in physics, they'll be able to get jobs. Because you're talking about lasers, you're talking about chemistry, you're talking about statistical manufacturing. These are high-paying jobs. Instead of having kids coming out of college and they can't find a job. This is going back to what I was saying before. We've shipped our economic clustering for the last 35 years, and it's starting to affect us. So it's time to move it back. Not just that, it allows us to have a war footing against China. Now, here's the rub. The more that we bring back our domestic manufacturing, there's less of a desire to maybe support Taiwan in a war. You know, so that you know, there's a downside to this. But I am all for the government coming in and helping to support Intel. Unfortunately, Intel didn't see the writing on the wall, and that they were so focused on CPU. And then even back in the day during Steve Jobs, if you remember, Steve Jobs started putting Intel in the Mac. It was the MacBook, right? And then eventually Apple started doing their own chips. So that, I think, was the start of the fall for Intel. They were so focused on CPU, right? And you had this, you know, company on the periphery, NVIDIA, doing GPUs, you know, for gamers. And they just didn't see the changing tide, where you had big companies like Apple creating their own chip for their different devices. And Intel just slowly lost share. Instead of like go, well, wait a minute, what's going on in the gaming market? How do we, you know, try to get into it? I mean, Intel had all the infrastructure to be NVIDIA. They had it all. They just didn't have the vision. But having a robust semiconductor industry in the United States is super important. It started here. Texas Instruments, it started here, right? But it went overseas. So bring it back. And there's going to be a lot of kids coming out of college that are like in physics and in chemistry and in computer science and in robotics and in artificial intelligence. It will give them a means to start their career. It'll give them a means to start learning the trade, right? You get out of college or even high school and you start learning something, whatever it is, and you go and move up the ladder.
Grants away. Donald Trump views we should get benefits for the economics that we put out.
Yeah, I love your response then to, I mentioned this analyst, Stacy Raskin, because he's written on it. He's one of the top analysts who follows this company for years. You know, he says that we know the company's recognized $2.2 billion in CHIPS Act grants to date. And suppose one could argue that given the delays, they probably aren't going to get all the rest anyway, that being another $8+ billion. Nevertheless, trading 10% of the company for what it now seems worse than the prior agreement, which basically they were getting the money for free. You know, do you not put Intel in a better position? Do you not put them in a better position to compete? Is that, you know, should that be a concern, since you want them to be the competitor you described earlier in terms of a U.S. champion?
Look, the CHIPS Act was just a giveaway to rich companies. I mean, why in the world is the United States...
What it was is that as Intel, think about this, as Intel was starting to decline and the demand for their chips were starting to decline, you have all these other big companies making their own chip, and they're having it made by Taiwan, right? They were having a decline in their demand, but they have a lobbying group. They have senators. They have people that they know. Oh, give some of that money to us, some of that chip money to us, and we'll fill some of the hole that we have, even though that no one wants to buy our chips, even though that our business model, our business plan for the future is somewhat not very optimistic. The thing is that they need to have a different vision. They need to start thinking, what is going on with what's the new economy, and being able to invest in it. Instead of this whole corporate welfare because of lobbying groups. And this is a big problem in the United States, especially with the lobbying with K Street. You have a corporation that may be declining. They try to create certain types of regulation that will benefit them instead of their and push out their competitors. And or they get some sort of subsidy or some sort of help by the government through the CHIPS Act, let's just say under Biden. And it's not really helping the company because of poor management. See, they were supposed to build this fab, right? Well, instead, it's to keep on kicking out the dividends to the shareholders. It's to fill some of the holes because of bad management. Well, no, they need to get their shit together because we're going to be going to war with China. All right. Now, if we're going to go to war with China, we better be able to make those chips because majority of the chips that are made in the world are in Taiwan. Intel dropped the ball. So what it is you have these analysts from Wall Street. You have these analysts from Wall Street going, well, this is a bad deal. The deal under Biden was better because we didn't have to give up, relinquish any control. Well, wait a minute. If you ran the business better, you wouldn't need the CHIPS Act. You wouldn't be in this problem. You wouldn't be losing your market share. So it's Wall Street again trying to push back on bringing back the economic clustering.
And giving it to companies like TSMC, which is worth $1 trillion. I mean, why would we give them money to come to America? Donald Trump understands how to do this. What he does is he says, if you don't build in America, you're going to pay a 100% tariff and then watch them come flying in. So the idea is let's change with respect to Intel. We want Intel to be successful in America, okay? We'd like an American transistor built in America, right? We'd like an American to be doing that. So Donald Trump says, hey, look, let's turn the money that Biden was going to just give away and turn that to equity for the American people. Yes, it is a worse deal than giving it away. But when you put this money in the hands of Donald Trump, you're going to get a better deal for the American taxpayer. That's what Donald Trump is.
Not just that, you're going to be forcing accountability. That's the problem. It's just that Intel doesn't want the accountability. But they'll take the free money and then quarter after quarter say that the fab plant is over budget and it's way over budget and that and it's delayed and da. So what it was is for the management a windfall and for the shareholders a windfall. But the taxpayers have to pay for it. During Lehman, I was for GM getting support by the government. All right. What I'm against is GM sending jobs overseas when the American taxpayer bailed them out. I have a big problem with that.
Move to me. Well, all right. You made the obvious to you. Do you get governance here? By the way, once you're in for 10%, do you have to go in for even more?
No. Come on.
No, what?
Come on, stop that stuff. It's not governance, right? We're just converting what was a grant under Biden into equity for the Trump administration.
I get that. I just asked if you're going to get governance. You own 10% of the company. You don't. Why wouldn't you want
non-voting?
Okay.
No, stop.
Well, I'm not overdoing it, but you got a golden share on U.S. Steel, so it's not like impossible to imagine that you do want some level of governance here if you're going to put 10% of taxpayers' money into 10% of the company of taxpayers' money.
Let's discuss the golden share on U.S. Steel. What happened is the Japanese Nippon Steel made a list of 12 promises. How do you make sure after they buy the company, they live up to their exact 12 promises? You say, look, we'll have a golden share. And what was the golden share? 12 promises. live up to what you said, you can buy the company. You don't live up to what you said, the government's going to make you live up to what you've said. This is Donald Trump's way of thinking, which is make people do what they say, make them live up to what they say, and make sure you get the benefit of the bargain for the American taxpayer.
I'm sure you've read the journal Pushback already, the op-ed page. Once the government acquires a stake in Intel, politicians will have an incentive to keep pouring on subsidies so they wouldn't have to admit a mistake. This is corporate statism, and it rarely does end well.
Well, we were giving away the money. I mean, imagine this. Look, the Biden administration literally was giving Intel for free and giving TSMC money for free. And all these companies just giving them money for free. And Donald Trump turns that into saying, hey, we want equity for the money. If we're going to give you the money, we want a piece of the action for the American taxpayer. How could that not be smarter, better, and more important for the American taxpayer than just free money for $100 billion, $1 trillion companies? Makes no sense.
Exactly.
Fixing
I'm totally in agreement with Ludnick on this. 100%. This is the way to do it. But you have these transnational capitalists that want to have the labor arbitrage, want to have the regulation arbitrage, and if they start to have problems, they want the American taxpayer to bail them out. But they don't want to come back. They'll find loopholes, tax reasons, whatever, to not bring the manufacturing back. And then they always use the trope, Americans don't have the skills to do it. Bullshit. Americans do have the skills. There's 100% we have the skills to do it. Semiconductor industry started here and it's coming back. So don't believe this crap that it can only be made in China. Apple, about 2 years ago, Tim Cook was being interviewed on a business channel. He was at a conference and he was asked, why don't you make products in the United States? And he basically said that the United States doesn't have skilled workers to do it. Really? Is that really the issue? Or is it because to sell a $1,000 phone, it only really costs you less than $100? That's a pretty big markup. And not only that, start looking into the actual waste, the water waste, the chromium waste, the toxic waste that comes in on actually manufacturing these phones. And then you start realizing what the real deal is with the iPhone and the iPad. It's the waste and the labor arbitrage. It has nothing to do with skill. Now, people would say, well, we don't want jobs where we're just putting screws in on an assembly line. How many screws are actually in an iPhone? You ever open one up? There's not that many. It's not about screws. And a lot of that stuff is robotic arms that pick the part up and put them into a fixture. So we have manufacturing engineers that know how to do assembly lines. They're telling you a narrative that's just wrong, but they want to maintain that labor arbitrage. Now, it may be true that they can find a cheaper source in Asia than in the United States, but you don't have the economic clustering of the United States, and therefore your GDP, your debt to GDP ratio is higher. Well, if our GDP was higher and we maintain the debt, our debt to GDP ratio would be going down. And if Niall Ferguson is right, and if you have an elevated debt to GDP ratio, and if your debt, your interest payments are higher than your defense spending annually, you're a declining empire. But the corporations that want the handout when they, and they maintain this transnational capitalism, they don't care. They don't care if they deep six the country. All they care about is their quarter. Do they make it? Oh, we got a cash infusion by the government because of the CHIPS Act. And then the analysts will, do their calculation, do their NPV, net present value, and discount based on a certain rate. And then they say that, that the company is, is a buy because stock's trading at 115 and it should be trading at 2,000 or whatever. But it was the taxpayers that had to bail them out because of the poor management. So I agree with Nick. You always have, when you start hearing people going, oh, Americans can't make stuff, oh, Americans, and they don't have the skills. Bullshit, we don't have the skills. Look at how many people are coming out of college that have engineering degrees, chemistry degrees, right? Computer science degrees, and they're having a hard time finding work. You know why? Because the economic cluster was sold to Asia. All right. Now, what is interesting, I'm going to play two different videos here. Fox News about Zelensky and the Russian summit, and CNN. So let's play CNN first because they're spinning it in a sense where this is going to fail. Now, my take, I've been watching a lot of this. My take from CNN and MSNBC. Now I think it's just called MS News or whatever. I think they're rebranding it. But MSNBC and CNN, they want Trump to fail. They're looking for something where Trump fails with these negotiations. All right, so let's see what CNN has to say here. Before we do that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. It's very important to follow the protocol that I have. It's something that I have been doing for a long time to slow down the aging process and to get healthy. All right? It's a holistic approach, and it's a great way to get healthy so you're not dependent on pharmacopoeia. All right? The first part of this is a good foundation, and then you build off of that foundation. Now, what's the foundation? The foundation is a multivitamin and a probiotic. Why? Because multivitamins are super important for enzymatic activity, and a probiotic helps with your gut health. And health for your body starts at the gut. All right? So, complete multivitamin is in stock. It's very high quality. It's easy to digest. And it has the vitamins and minerals that you need as cofactors for enzymatic activity, so your cells will perform the way they're supposed to. And you build off of this. That's why I call it the foundation. So go to my store and get the multivitamin. It's called the complete multivitamin. And get the probiotics. I have two types of probiotics. I have a powdered version and a VeggieCap version. I have the powdered version in stock right now. Now, with probiotics, you take it. It's going to improve your absorption of nutrients. It's going to help with the mucosal lining in your gut. You're going to improve your gut biome. It's going to improve your immune system. It's going to improve your metabolism. It'll even improve your sleep pattern. Because if you have the proper gut biome, you actually produce melatonin. And guess what? That will help you sleep. And with proper sleep, you'll be consolidating memory. You'll be less irritable. You'll be able to detoxify your central nervous system. Your skin will improve. So you get lots of benefits by taking a good probiotic. So go to my store, get the probiotics, and stack it with the complete multivitamin. And by doing that, that's the foundation that we're going to be building off of. So please go to my store, use discount 5, and you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last. So let's do this comparison between CNN and Fox. This video was posted about an hour ago by CNN.
New Russian strikes on Ukraine, the largest aerial assault since July, and just a few minutes ago, Moscow refused to commit to a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, though it's stopping short of ruling out any further talks. Now, the meeting was supposed to be one of the major takeaways, if not the major takeaway from the historic White House summit yesterday. President Trump even posted that he's working on setting up that bilateral meeting between Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. But again, just a few minutes ago, the Kremlin said it is only prepared to, quote, raise the level of the delegation it sends to meetings with Ukraine. And that really is the key this morning, to try to determine what the concrete takeaways were from what were very visibly good feelings at this White House summit yesterday between President Trump, President Zelensky, and all these key European leaders you're seeing on the screen right now. They left with good feelings. The question this morning now is, will they get good results? Let's go right to CNN's Elaine Treat at the White House for the latest. The president continues to say he's setting up the meeting. The Russians continue to throw a little bit of cold water on that, Elaine.
Yeah, I mean, it was very clear heading into yesterday, John, that that was the goal for the president specifically, President Trump, I should say. He wanted to be able to get another meeting on the books that included Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sitting down in the same room. And you saw him, you know, he did have a 40-minute phone call yesterday in the Oval Office with the Russian leader. He actually paused his ongoing meeting with the 7 European leaders and Zelensky taking place at the White House to have that conversation with Putin. And then I talked to a White House official who told me he then invited that group back in, the European leaders and Zelensky, to the Oval Office after he wrapped that call to fill them in on what was discussed. And then, of course, we saw his Truth Social post saying that he is making arrangements for a bilateral meeting first between Zelensky and Putin, and then hopefully a trilateral meeting after that. But you're exactly right. There's a lot of skepticism of whether that is actually possible, when it could take place, where it would take place, but if the Russians are even willing to agree to that. And I think the key thing here is we're hearing them throw cold water on this idea. I remind you that Putin does not view Zelensky as his equal. You know, he was the one who started the war that invaded Ukraine illegally, and that's really been a problem throughout this entire time. However, there's also not just the president here, but a lot of other top advisors to him are telling him that they believe that the only way to get this solved and to end the war is to have the two of them sit down in the same room and discuss this. And that's kind of what we heard from Bessent this morning when he was on CNBC. Take a listen.
He invited President Putin to land that the Russians used to own. He displayed a huge amount of military hardware and then did a flyover. It was kind of like inviting your uncontrollable neighbor to your house and showing him your gun case. And my strong belief is that there will be a bilateral meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky. And that's the only way to end this conflict, is to get the two sides talking.
I mean, what a way to describe Vladimir Putin coming to American soil. You know, hearing the Treasury Secretary say it's like inviting your uncontrollable neighbor to your house and showing them your gun case. So all to say, though, you could hear Bessent there adding that he believes this is the only way to get Putin and Zelensky in the same room and try to end the war by getting these two sides to talk. But one other thing, John, before we go, I just want to reiterate to you what we heard from a number of European leaders yesterday about being one of the most important things to come out of this summit, and that was having the United States and having President Donald Trump himself saying he wants to help when it comes to security guarantees for Ukraine. A lot of them, Starmer, Mark Rutte, you know, the UK Prime Minister and the NATO Secretary General, all saying that was a breakthrough from Monday.
Again, yeah, then one of the other concrete takeaway were the discussions about security talks. Again, we're waiting to see what develops. Oftentimes the meetings, they're not happening until they are. So we'll just have to wait and see. Landry, thank you very much. Okay.
A great point. And even as the Kremlin is refusing to commit right now to a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Zelensky, security guarantees, as John was just saying, are at the center of talks for top European leaders still today. The French president and the British prime minister are leading talks this morning for the 30 nations who are part of what they call and consider themselves the coalition of the willing. CNN's Claire Sebastian's in London. She's been tracking this one for us. And what are you learning about what's coming out of this now, another round of meetings today?
Well, look, I think what's clear, Kate, is there is a very long road ahead to determine exactly how to deter future Russian aggression. There were a lot of positive noises coming out of the White House meeting yesterday. It is not nothing at all that the US is now openly embracing the idea of being somehow involved in these security guarantees, although we don't know exactly how. As of yet, this is what the European leaders have been pushing for all along. So listen to the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer talking about this in a video he posted today.
Breakthrough when it comes to security guarantees, with now the coalition of willing countries, that's 30 or so countries that we've been coordinating for some months on security guarantees, now working with the US at pace to work up those security guarantees. These guarantees will ensure that if there is a peace, if there is a deal, then we hold to it and there isn't further conflict.
So what do we mean by security guarantees? Well, it could be a number of different things. The French President Emmanuel Macron coming out of the White House yesterday talking about, no limits on Ukraine's armed forces. Russia, of course, has demanded in the past that there should be limits on the size of Ukraine's army, which is now the second biggest in Europe after Russia. He talked about reassurance forces in the land, air and sea. There are certain countries, for example, the UK, that have already said they might be willing to put boots on the ground. President Trump didn't explicitly rule out US peacekeepers being involved in the Oval Office meeting yesterday, though he was pretty vague about that. So the work continues. There's also a European Council meeting this morning, EU heads of state, another very important frenzied day of diplomacy here in Europe. Okay?
Sure does seem it. So, Claire, thank you so much for following it for us. John.
All right, with us now is Congressman Mike Quigley from Illinois, a Democrat and the co-chair of the Congressional Ukraine Caucus. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. The news we heard just a few minutes ago, the Kremlin, Sergei Lavrov, really, the senior Kremlin official, refusing to commit to the bilateral meeting between Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky. What is that refusal, at least as of now, what does that tell you?
The Chancellor of Germany was right. Unless there's a ceasefire forced upon Putin, there's not going to be any other meetings. And if there are meetings, what will they actually contribute? But the fact of the matter is, they're missing the point here. Putin understands strength, not talks, not repercussions put off concessions made before negotiations begin. We're honestly seeing the beginning of a new era. I guess you'd call it the Trump doctrine. The U.S. will be tough until it's not, and we will reward invaders of a sovereign democratic country with land, and we won't hold that person responsible for the war crimes. He doesn't understand weakness. He understands strength, and we're not even using the assets we have toward that end.
You did hear the British Prime Minister call it a breakthrough in terms of the discussions on security guarantees. Do you think security guarantees, after some kind of a deal, would provide Ukraine with some of the safety that they feel like they need?
I guess I wouldn't blame Ukraine to never trust this unless it means NATO, right? They go back to Budapest. We're reminding ourselves that Putin has never kept a promise in Eastern Europe, and he never will. To them, I guess I understand the Ukrainians to believe that here we are going to reward Putin for his land acquisitions, and we'll probably see Putin rebuild his army, rebuild his economy, wait another year or two, and then go and finish the job. If anything, Ukraine has earned the right to be in NATO. They have fought on the front lines of democracy. All the reasons we fought the Second World War and formed the United Nations, we're now saying, gee, I hope he shows up, and gee, maybe we can get these concessions, and maybe we can get guarantees. I was on your program at the start of the war. We were asked, what would constitute victory for Ukraine? It had to do with rebuilding Ukraine, getting their territory back, holding Putin accountable, and security guarantees, meaning NATO. Maybe we get one out of those four, but no one can call that a victory. It's really appeasement. We want peace, not the worst kind of appeasement.
How much U.S. involvement would you support in some of these security guarantees?
We have to use our assets. The first thing we have to do is seize the frozen Russian assets that are in Europe, 300 billion, 5 to 8 roughly in the United States, and use that to help Ukraine defend itself. And we have to put the sanctions in place, which, by the way, Republicans and Democrats solidly agree on. It's rare that we see that happen. If you want something like guarantees and you want a uniformity there, it has to come with strength. If you know, here I am, the liberal Democrat from Chicago, but you know, the lessons from 1939 are coming back. The voices of 39 are coming back, weak and strong. Chamberlain coming back saying, you know, some sort of land swap, some sort of appeasement gives us peace in our time. That's not what Hitler understood. It's not what Putin understands. I truly want peace. But if you go at it begging and pleading a brutal murderer, it's not going to work.
Congressman Mike Quigley from Illinois, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much.
All right, let's go to Fox and see what they're
paying $14.99 a month for a streaming app,
President Trump
and
making
$9.99 a month for a music app,
towards
and $12.99 for a business app.
Ukrainian President Zelensky and European leaders in the Oval Office yesterday. Look at that picture.
President Trump also confirming a meeting between Russian President Putin and Zelensky is in the works.
Let me just pause really quick just to do a quick advertising here. Please go to my store. Help support the work that I do. I give you my opinion on what's going on in the news. I also tell you how to trade the market. Like, for example, the S&P 500 is hovering at the 6,430 mark. There's a resistance level at 6,500. There's a support level at 6,250. And basically, the market's not going to move until we start seeing the Fed rate cut or some positive movements on tariffs. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get vitamin C with magnesium. This will help with your skin, your immune system, and your brain function. Olive leaf extract helps with your immune system and your cardiovascular system. It brings down inflammation and helps with your lipid profile. And magnesium and zinc helps with your immune system and your brain function. It's super important to take magnesium, protect those neurons, help with your brain function, and be cognizant of your environment, making sure that you are paying attention to your friends, your family, the people that you associate with at work. You're going to start noticing individuals in their 40s and later getting early onset of dementia. Now, there's a multitude of reasons for this. Some of it is because of the environmental exposure. Some of it is due to overuse of these electrical devices around us that's causing us to go into a less active brainwave, and other issues with the crisis from 2020 and the aftermath from it. But there are going to be different people for different reasons that are going to get early onset of dementia. Now, if you don't do the proper diet and exercise, clean your environment, take the proper supplementation to bring down inflammation and to help with brain function, you are increasing your chances of early onset of dementia. Now, it's starting to happen already. If you look at people around you, look at how they're talking versus the way they used to talk. Are they thinking slower? Are they moving? If their motor coordination is worse off? What about their gait issues? The way they get up from a chair and start walking? Are they starting to shake with their hands? These are all signs of neurological degeneration. And it's starting in their 40s. This is not just a geriatric issue anymore. So you better start paying attention. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Take supplements that help with protecting neurons and improving brain function. Magnesium and zinc, olive leaf extract, and vitamin C is a great stack. Helps with the immune system, helps with brain function, even helps with the skin. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the great supplements I offer. Use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you will get a free gift until supplies last.
He meets them together. And joining us now on the phone with more details, the President of the United States, the 45th and 47th President Donald J. Trump. Mr. President, thanks so much for joining Fox and Friends this morning.
Good morning. That's quite a crew. That's quite a crew.
Now remember, we're trying to compare what Fox is saying and what CNN was saying. Now, what did CNN basically say? CNN was saying Putin really doesn't want to talk to Zelensky, and that this is going to be a failure for Trump. So I haven't seen this video, so let's play it. This is what played this morning.
Well, Mr. President, the whole world was watching yesterday as you got leaders from the European Union, NATO as well, from all over the world. How did you get them to Washington, to the Oval Office so fast?
Well, I think really they have respect for our country again. A year ago, they wouldn't have come. They wouldn't have even thought about it. Now, we've become the hottest country anywhere in the world. Everybody wants to be here. When I made the call, they came. And they said there's really never been anything like it. You'd have one president or one prime minister, but there's never been, such a group. And these really represent the European nations, these people. And they're very good people, and they want to end the war, that horrible war with Ukraine and Russia. It's a horrible war.
It was such a sense of unity, and we all enjoyed watching it because America is on top, and it was on your turf, on your terms. I know yesterday you talked about arranging a meeting to take place in 2 weeks between Putin and Zelensky. Is there an update there, and do you plan to attend?
No, I thought I'd do first let them meet. They haven't been exactly best friends. They haven't gotten along very well. And I called President Putin yesterday, and I do have a good relationship, but it only matters if we get things done. Otherwise, I don't care about the relationship. I do have a good relationship with him, but I want to get things done. I've solved 7 wars. We ended 7 wars. I thought this would be one of the easier ones, and this has turned out to be the toughest one. India, Pakistan, these were big ones, and also all big ones, and some going for 31, 32 years, one for 35 years. The Congo, think of that, the Congo and Rwanda for 35 years. I got that one done. I got them all done, but this one is the one that is the most difficult, and I thought it would be an easy one. So I hope President Putin is going to be good, and if he's not, it's going to be a rough situation. And I hope that President Zelensky will do what he has to do. He has to show some flexibility also. The thing is a mess. This was started by Joe Biden. This was a war that should have never happened. Millions of people are dead. The country's blown to pieces, Ukraine, and it's a shame. My wife Melania wrote that beautiful note to President Putin about children. The children are devastated. They're taken away from their homes. The whole thing. And this is a war that would have never, ever, ever happened if we had a real president.
So, Mr. President, it's been barely a week since you announced that first meeting in Alaska. It's just been days since that meeting, and then you had the meeting yesterday. In the course of having these negotiations, what has surprised you the most between Zelensky and Putin in terms of their strength or weakness of their position right now?
Well, I think the fact that maybe they're getting along a little bit better than I thought. Otherwise, I wouldn't have set up the 2 meeting. I would have set up the 3. Try that. But I think they're doing a little bit better. There's been tremendous bad blood. And again, this was all worked out by an administration that didn't have a clue. And if you remember, they said, well, if you made a minor incursion, that would be okay. That was the end. The whole thing when Biden made that statement. But minor incursion, what does that mean? So I think they're doing okay. I wouldn't say they are ever going to be best friends, but they're doing okay. And we're just going to see. So we're setting up a meeting. I sort of set it up with Putin and Zelensky. And, they're the ones that have to call the shots. We're 7,000 miles away, in all fairness. We've spent through the previous administration $350 billion. Europe has spent a lot also, $100 billion, but it should be reversed. If we should have been in for anything, but it wouldn't have happened. So that would have been much better because so many people died. This is the biggest bad situation since World War II. There's been nothing even close.
So, Mr. President, I know you've been doing deals your entire life when it comes to real estate deals, but this is something a little different. The thing that is surprising a lot of people is when it comes to the security guarantees. I know President Putin said no NATO, and you said, you know, we're just going to take it off the table. But you did get President Putin to agree to NATO-like protections. So tell us about that. What does that entail?
Well, the war really started over NATO and Crimea. And they wanted Crimea back. That was given, not a shot fired by President Obama in perhaps the worst real estate deal I've ever seen. There's been a couple of them. I would say the Gaza Strip was a pretty bad one, too. Given by Israel so they'd have peace. So they gave away a big percentage of their oceanfront property in order to have peace. How did that work out? Not so good. And Crimea is the apple of Ukraine. I mean, it's so beautiful. And Obama gave it away. Nobody ever mentions that. If I ever did that, the fake news would be, they would be writing about me day and night for years. He gave it away. He demanded that they let it go. And Russia came in and took it, just took it like candy from a baby. And it was really Obama's, not really, I mean, that was pure and simple. Obama's fault. What a terrible thing he did to that country. And so they lost their heart. They lost the heart and soul of the Ukraine 14 years ago, whatever it might be. And it was so unnecessary to do that. And that's when it really began, when Obama gave it away. And then you had a lot of other events, but you have, tremendous hostility. The people of Ukraine were mortified when that took place. That really began a lot of hatred when they gave it. And they didn't have to. Not a shot was fired. They just took over the most valuable piece and the biggest piece in the sense of, and surrounded on four sides by ocean, just a little passage to get you back onto the mainland. The most beautiful piece of property you've ever seen. As a real estate developer, I look at it, I said, why the heck did he do that to them? And so there's great hostility, and maybe rightfully so. But one thing was NATO. They went in and they said, we want you, we want to get Crimea back. This was at the beginning. Now, Putin, in all fairness to him, he made a good deal. He got it from Obama. But they said, we want it back. And that was not exactly well received because it was like 12 years before. That's where Russia has its submarine base. And, that's been there long before Putin. They've been there for a long time. But long before Putin. And the other thing they said is, we want to be a member of NATO. Well, both of those things are impossible. Because, again, long before Putin, it was a no-no by Russia or the Soviet Union or anything you want to call it. Sort of a similar thing as it gets larger, but very similar. But it was always a no-no. You could not. Russia said, we don't want the so-called opponent or the enemy, let's use that term, we don't want them on our border. And they were right. They were okay. And yet they went in and they asked, with the United States, they said, put us into NATO, and everybody knew you just can't do that. They would never have agreed to it. This is before Putin. This is long before Putin. It was just a no-no. It was something that was never going to happen. So they asked for it, and they shouldn't have asked for it because it was, very insulting. Now, they could have asked for many other things. But the other thing they wanted to do is getting Crimea back, and that was given. They had built, they were expanding everything and spending a lot of money. All because Barack Hussein Obama gave it away in one of the dumbest real estate deals I've ever seen.
But Mr. President, you got the Article 5 protections, though, for Ukraine. So they're not going to be a part of NATO, but you still got the same protection.
So they're not going to be a part of NATO, but we've got the European nations, and they'll front-load it, and they'll have some of them, France and Germany, a couple of them, UK, they want to have, boots on the ground. Not in. I don't think it's going to be a problem, to be honest with you. I think Putin is tired of it. I think they're all tired of it. But you never know. We're going to find out about President Putin in the next couple of weeks. That I can tell you. And we're going to see where it all goes. It's possible that he doesn't want to make a deal. I always said, you interviewed me, Lawrence, and I think Charlie also. Lawrence, I hate to tell you, Charlie was about the first person in the world to endorse me. He endorsed me about a year before I ran. And that's why he told me this morning, sir, would you do an interview? And unlike Biden, I don't need permission from my staff, okay? And then only to be told that I'm not doing it. But Charlie endorsed me about a year before, I think, and he puts it up on the site. It's still not checked. It's still in the site. I endorsed President Trump before he even ran. So I always like a guy like that. I must tell you. Now, Lawrence is going to be a superstar, but he was a little later to the game.
Well, it's a lot more crowded these days than it was back then.
It's pretty
Mr.
crowded.
President, what kind of assurances do you feel like you have that going forward and past this Trump administration, it won't be American boots on the ground defending that border?
Well, you have my assurance, I'm president, and I'm just trying to stop people from being killed, Charlie. Look, they're losing from 5,000 to 7,000 people a week in that ridiculous war that should have never happened. If we had a normal president, not even a great president, but we had a normal president, it wouldn't have happened. But we had a guy that didn't have a clue. And they're losing, think of it, 5,000 to 7,000 a week. So even these guys, they'll say, okay, let's meet next week. I think you can't meet next week. Next week, you're going to have 7,000 more dead people. You can't do that. You got to get this thing done. One of the things at the table was one of the gentlemen, who's a great guy, but he said, I hope I didn't insult him. He said, well, let's meet in another month or two, and let's see if we can start, making some more. He said, a month or two, you're going to have another 40,000 people dead in a month or two. You have to do it tonight. And I did, actually. I called President Putin, and we're trying to work out a meeting with President Zelensky. We'll see what happens there. And then if that works out, then I'll go to the trilat and close it up.
Oh, that'd be good. Mr. President, did y'all discuss any land swaps yesterday? Because we've talked a lot about the Donbass region, and what was the feeling in the room? What did the other leaders say about this?
Well, they understand. Look, everybody can play cute and this and that, but, Ukraine's going to get their life back. They're going to stop having people killed all over the place, and they're going to get a lot of land. But this was a war, and Russia is a powerful military nation, whether people like it or not. It's a powerful nation. It's a much bigger nation. It's not a war that should have been started. You don't do that. You don't take on a nation that's 10 times your size. And military experts look. If it wasn't for the greatest military equipment, we make the greatest military equipment in the world, and we gave them, whatever. They took probably a lot of money too. But they had tremendous, they had the Patriot missile, which is the best in the world. All the equipment, we make the best equipment in the world by far. Everyone else is like nothing. So we gave them a lot of equipment. Now, with that said, the Ukrainian soldiers were brave as hell. Because it's fighting a force that's much, much bigger. And in theory, much more powerful. And, it's not like they've stopped. I assume you've all seen the map. A big chunk of territory is taken. And that territory has been taken. Now, they're talking about Donbass, but Donbass, right now, as you know, is 79% owned and controlled by Russia. So they understand what that means.
Mr. President, what did the other leaders tell you? Because it seemed to be, this is unlike the first Trump term. There was great unity that was there, and we saw the public comments. But when you got them in the Oval Office, and we have this photo of you sitting at the Resolute desk, and all of these world leaders are sitting in front of you, what did they say to you privately? Because it looks like they're on the same page as you, sir.
Yeah, they are. They're very good people. They're very good leaders of their countries. And they want to get back to leading their country. They're consumed far more with this than we are. Because they're right there. We have an ocean that's separating us, right? Think of an ocean, a big, beautiful ocean. And they don't. They're right there. So they have to, it's a different kind of a thing for them. When it comes to security, they're willing to put people on the ground. We're willing to help them with things, especially probably if you talk about by air, because there's nobody has the kind of stuff we have. Really, they don't have. But I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think if a deal is made, famous last words, right? But I think if a deal is made, I think Russia's had it, they've all had it, and for a very extended period of time, I don't think there'll be a problem. But there'll be some form of security. It can't be NATO, because that's just not something that would ever happen. They couldn't do that. So who would want that? I mean, if you were Russia, who would want to have your enemy, your opponent, sitting on your line? You don't do that. So it was always thought that Ukraine was sort of a buffer between Russia and the rest of Europe. And it was a big, wide buffer. Everything worked out well until Biden got involved. You know, when Biden gave them $100 billion right up front, I don't give them anything. You know, I don't know if you know it, but since I've been there, we don't pay. First of all, I made a deal to take rare earth. That's the equivalent of much more than the $350 billion that Biden got away, because I felt so foolish. It was so stupid what he did. And I was able to make a deal with Ukraine, and they were very nice. They have great rare earth, among the best in the world. And we took much more than the $350 billion, and they were great about it. So we got that, handled. But now we don't pay any money to Ukraine. They buy through NATO, because I got NATO to go from 2% to 5%, 2% when they didn't pay, 2% of GDP, 2% when they didn't pay, and 5% now they do pay. So it's trillions of dollars. So what we do is we make the equipment, the military equipment, and sell it at a low price. We sell it to the NATO. We sell it to NATO, and NATO pays us immediately. And that's the way it's working. And then NATO takes it and does what they want with it, because they really have the right to do what they want with it. But for the most part, they give it to Ukraine.
President Trump.
So we're not losing. We're not like we were with Biden, where we're paying hundreds of billions of dollars that we're paying nothing.
President Trump, during the meeting yesterday, when you decided to call Vladimir Putin, what was the reaction among the other people in the room, and what was President Putin's reaction to being brought into a phone call in the middle of your meeting?
Well, I think they expected it. I didn't do it in front of them. I thought that would be disrespectful to President Putin. I wouldn't do that, because they have not had the warmest relations. And actually, President Putin wouldn't talk to the people from Europe. I mean, that was part of the problem. They had no communication. They had no communication with the White House for years, as people died. Years with Biden and his people. No communication. Putin told me years. It was years that he didn't speak to anybody from the White House, and it was a long time that he didn't speak to anybody from Europe. No, it's a fractured relationship. And when I came in, I always had, despite the Russia hoax, which truly was a very dangerous thing for our country, but despite that, I maintained a very good relationship. I mean, you saw that when he got off his plane, I got off my plane. There's a warmth there that you can't, there's a decent feeling. And it's a good thing, not a bad thing. People would say, oh, that's such a terrible thing. It's not a terrible thing. You know what? We've got the most nuclear weapons in the world, and the most powerful. He's got second.
So can you describe for us how that happened? Did you just announce that you were going to go into the other room to make the phone call, and then you got up and left, and then came back?
I think they sort of knew I was, at the end of the meeting, I was going to call President Putin, and President Putin expected it, and he was there. Now, by the time I called him, it was 1 o'clock in the morning in Russia. Russia's a big place. They have 11 time zones, I believe. 9 or 11, but I think it's 11.
But
Think of it,
11
time zones. That's a lot of time zones. So it was late. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, but he picked it up very happily. Sure, he works very hard, like we all do. And we had a very good call. And I told him that we're going to set up a meeting with President Zelensky, and you and he will meet. And then after that meeting, if everything works out, okay, I'll meet and we'll wrap it up. But, it takes, in this case, 2 to tango. They have to have somewhat of a relationship. Otherwise, we're just wasting a lot of time. I don't want to be doing that I just want to end it. I want to end it. We're not losing American lives. We're not losing American soldiers. We're losing Russian and Ukrainian, mostly soldiers. Some people, as missiles hit wrong spots or get lobbed into cities like Kiev and town. But, if I can save 7,000 people a week from being killed, I think that's I want to try and get to heaven if possible. I'm hearing I'm not doing well. I hear I'm really at the bottom of the totem pole. But if I can get to heaven, this will be one of the reasons. Well, I think I saved a lot of lives with India, Pakistan. They were going at it. The planes were being shot down. That was going to be maybe a nuclear war if I let that go. And I did that through trade. I was negotiating with both of them. I said, I'm not going to make a trade deal with you guys. You fight until you get peace. And I got them on the phone. I made a peace deal. And many deals, 6, actually 7. And then we took out the nuclear capability from Iran. That was a big one in those pilots and those planes when people saw, we had the B-2 fly right over President Putin as he left his plane. He looked up, he said, what the hell is that? That's a hell of a noise. So we didn't make it environmentally friendly, okay?
So
okay,
did the First Lady let you read the letter that Mrs. Zelensky wrote to her?
I purposely didn't. I did not do it purposely. It was given to me sealed, and I'm sure it would have been fine, but she gave a letter to Melania, and Melania told me it was absolutely a beautiful letter, so I'm going to see it, sending me a copy, but I gave it to her yesterday sealed. It's nice when you give something sealed. I don't like when things are up. I don't like it. So anyway, but it was a beautiful letter, I'm sure.
Mr. President, there was a lot of talk yesterday when we were watching this about what happens after your presidency. How can we ensure that this conflict, that Putin doesn't inch in closer or more into the Ukraine territory? Is there anything that we can do? Can our congressmen and women pass any laws that would involve Article?
In 1 week, you'll see your energy. In 2 weeks, you'll feel your breath. In 3 weeks, you'll have energy.
Would involve Article 5. How would that be handled?
All you can do is make sure you get a good president, not one of these wackos like in California that runs the worst state anybody's seen, or that guy in Illinois who his family threw him out of the business because he was no good. Now he's running Illinois and he wants to run for president. He's got zero chance. Maybe Newsom has a little bit of a chance. I don't know. But it's hard to believe because his record's bad. But all you can do is hope you don't get that as president. We have a great bench, as you know that. We have great talent. And JD and Marco and Scott Bessen's been great, and Howard. They're all, I mean, we have such superstars. Remember this, take a look at the border. The border was a disaster. Millions of people were pouring through, open border. Within 2 months it was perfect. And within now, every week, every month they say zero people are coming in illegal. We were taking people from prisons all over the world, gang members, insane asylum, mental patients from the worst insane asylums in the world that dropped into our place. So now we have a very secure border, beautiful border. I built hundreds of miles of wall. Without that, we couldn't have a secure border.
Mr. President, it's clear that you have operational control of the border. I mean, when the numbers hit zero, that is clear for the whole world to see. I'm curious.
3 months in a row.
Right, without new laws even having to be passed. But Mr. President,
now I'm doing something that I'm having such fun with because I'm helping people. I've made Washington D.C. Just an incredible place. In literally 4 days, I have friends that say they're going out to dinner. Did you see what's happening with the restaurants? They're bursting. They're all closing and going bankrupt. I mean, it would be great. There's a guy named Sean Hannity. He might take a very lovely young lady that he knows very, very well to dinner in Washington, and they don't have to. She's sitting right next to you, by the way. I don't want to get her in trouble, so I better explain exactly. We don't want any secrets here. But that's the greatest relationship. I hope I'm not breaking it in. This could be the biggest. Hey, this could be the most important thing I said. But let me tell you, those are two great, Ainsley and Sean, great people. And when they go out to dinner, I don't want to see them get mugged. Now they can go out, they can hold hands, they can walk down the street. They're both superstars. I want to know who makes more money, because she's got to be making a lot.
Mr. President, we're so happy for them. But on a serious note, Mr. President, when you have those world leaders, because this is the topic of conversation for the whole world, when you have them sitting in front of you, did they express concerns about the next president, that they're not going to get the same type of treatment, security guarantees? Part of the deterrent of future attacks is your peace through strength. So that they say to you, Mr. President, we're concerned about the next leader?
They did. We talked about it. You know, it is what it is. I could say the same thing about them. I said, supposing you get a terrible leader in UK or France, or, you know, we had Ursula there who runs the whole gamut. You know, we just made the biggest trade deal in the world. And she's in charge of the Commission, the European Commission, and she's the boss. She was there too. I mean, that was really an incredible array of people. But you know, they say that actually maybe even more with regard to the economy. We have $17 trillion being invested in the United States and committed, and numbers that nobody's ever seen for AI plants and for this and for that. And We're taking in trillions and trillions of dollars. That's why we're doing so well. Plants are being built all over the country. Our country has gone from a dead country 1 year ago, we're the hottest country in the world. And every one of those people said it yesterday. They said, in 6 months, you made this the hottest country in the world that we are. We have $17 trillion coming in. And they said, well, what happens if you're no longer president and somebody comes in and cancels the tariffs that we've invested hundreds of billions of dollars of building these plants, and now you have some anti-business person come in? I said, well, life is full of nasty little surprises, but I don't think it's going to happen. We have a great bench, and the bench is really talented. You see a lot of the people, and I think you're going to get great people in government.
Well, President Trump, we want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. We know that you have lots of other wars around the world that you need to end, and that's more important than anything. So we appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Ainsley, thank you. I hope I didn't get you in trouble. No,
We appreciate your support.
I'll
Thank
say
you.
it. You know, I like this. It's a great couple. We love it. Have a good
Thank you,
time,
Mr.
everybody.
Congratulations for yesterday. Thank you, Mr. Trump.
Thank you all very much.
The 45th and 47th President of the United States.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the NAD+. This is a supplement that's going to help to boost up your NAD+ levels and increase your energy, help to repair your DNA damage and your mitochondrial DNA. And NAD+ helps to protect your neurons. Ubiquinol, the most bioavailable form of CoQ10 that you can purchase. This will soak up free radicals, help the health of the mitochondria, boost up your energy levels, and protect neurons. So a great neuro stack is to take the Ubiquinol and the NAD+. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Also, the first pillar of my core protocol is to take Max 35, Max 14, or Cleanse. Take a teaspoon a day, swish in your mouth, gargle, about 20, 30 seconds, and then swallow. What that will do is improve the epithelial lining in your oral cavity and your oral pharynx, help with the mucosal barrier, and boost up that immune system. Cleanse is 30 parts per million. Max 35 is 35 parts per million. I also have great deodorants. They're dual purpose. You use them as a deodorant for males or females, and it will help to detoxify your body. You can get it in peppermint, lavender, and tea tree, or in citrus. No aluminum, no baking soda, made from essential oils from the Himalayas. And lastly, structural nanosilver soaps. You can get it in peppermint, in lavender, also in charcoal tea tree, and lemongrass. So please go to my store, get a few bars for your household, very high quality structural nanosilver soaps. Use discount 5 on any order, you get $5 off. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last. All right, let's listen in to Bloomberg.
I mean, it's like me going to Rockford Park and playing in a pickup game with an NBA player. It's just not. Look, they've missed the window. I'm not saying like you can't have some small victories, but I mean that's the shame of the thing. Like they've missed it. Now look, I can't. You have a big install base. You can have some wins here and there. But you look at TSMC, you look at NVIDIA, you look what Broadcom's done, you look at obviously what Lisa Su and AMD's done. I think that's part of the problem with Intel. Look, I mean, U.S. government, SoftBank, others will get involved, but they have to stop running it like motor vehicles.
Danny, all right, let's get to the heart of the matter here. Is Penn State overrated at number 2?
No, I mean, like, I believe not just number 2. I think, like, they'll be the number 1 team in the country. I think this is our year, 2025, and Michigan, Penn State. This year, you know, you look at it, Ohio State. I think Big Ten's going to dominate. Texas, obviously, great teams, but
all right,
this is the year.
Let's listen with Marco Rubio on Fox.
I'm going to teach you a simple trick my husband does to stay hard for over 2 hours and last more than 3 rounds without using a single pill. Did you know your bat isn't getting...
Secretary of State Marco Rubio joins us now. All right, Secretary, you were in the room this afternoon with President Trump, Zelensky, all the European leaders.
Was there a big moment that happened?
Well, I think the whole thing was a big moment. Unprecedented, really, when you think about all these European leaders came here. 7 were there, and that included the head of NATO and the head of the EU. And they all said the same thing, which is this, after 3 years of sort of deadlock and no talks and no change in circumstances, this is the first time where there seems to be some movement. Now, look, this is a complicated war. There's no doubt about it. I mean, this has been going on for 3.5 years. A lot of people have died. A lot of territories exchanged back and forth. So it's not an easy thing to unwind. But nothing was happening on this war. Literally, the only option that we were given under the previous administration was continue to fund Ukraine for however much they need, for however long it takes. And now you have people actually talking about pathways towards ending it. Now, it's going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more time, but we are making progress. It's not me saying it. That is virtually every leader there today said that in front of the cameras, and they're saying it for a reason, because it's true and they're witnessing it and they've been a part of it.
So these European nations, and some of these are NATO countries, are they willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine to cement this peace deal? Would that make Ukraine kind of like a NATO ally?
Well, what's being contemplated, look, any sovereign country in the world has a right to enter into security alliances with other countries. It's not just NATO. We have such alliances with South Korea. We have it with Japan. Other countries have it with each other. And so I think everyone would acknowledge, including, by the way, for the first time, the Russian side, under President Trump's sort of pressure or, a suggestion, is that, in fact, a Ukraine post-conflict has a right to enter into security agreements with other countries. And we will work with our European allies and non-European countries, by the way, to build such a security guarantee. We're working on that right now. We'll continue to work on that. And that'll be something that'll have to be in place after a peace deal, so that Ukraine can feel safe moving forward. And we're coordinating that as we speak. We're involved in the coordination of it. So yeah, there are a number of countries that are willing to step forward and provide Ukraine security guarantees. But as the Ukrainians have said to us, and I think have said publicly, the strongest security guarantee they can come up with in their future is to have a strong military moving forward. And that's the other dynamic that's changed. We're no longer giving Ukraine weapons. We're no longer giving Ukraine money. We are now selling them weapons, and European countries are paying for it through NATO. They are using NATO to buy the weapons and transfer them to Ukraine. That's another big change from the way this war was approached just just under the Biden administration, for example.
Absolutely. And the minerals deal is also a nice security guarantee in another way. Were you in the room when the president talked to Vladimir Putin?
I was. And in that conversation, what came from it is that, the president suggested that Zelensky and Putin meet. So we're working on that now to try to set that up for them to meet somewhere, which again would be unprecedented. And then if that goes well, hopefully the next meeting will be a meeting between Presidents Putin, Trump, and Zelensky, where we hope to finalize a deal. We're not there yet, but that's what we're aiming towards. And that's one of the things that was discussed today, is how to get to that point. But just the fact that Putin is saying, sure, I'll meet with Zelensky, that's a big deal. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to leave that room best friends. I'm not saying they're going to leave that room with a peace deal. But I think the fact that people are now talking to each other, this wasn't happening for 3.5 years. This was a stalemated war of death and destruction. And let me tell you something, this president hates war. And he hates it. He thinks it's a waste of money and a waste of lives. And he has made it a priority, President Trump has, to bring about peace. If he sees an opportunity to step in and broker a peace, he wants to do it. He's been successful already 6 times in 6 months in achieving that. And he wants to achieve it with Ukraine and Russia as well.
So the timeline, it looks ideally, is Vladimir Putin meets with Zelensky, and then President Trump and Zelensky and Vladimir Putin meet, the three of them, and hopefully cement some sort of peace deal then. The issue about giving land back seems to be the sticking point. Is that the main sticking point? Is that Russia wants to keep the land that it's taken militarily? And how do you get around that? What's the negotiation over there?
Yeah, I don't think it's helpful to go into all the details of that, obviously, because these negotiations, frankly, work best when they're done privately and in our negotiation setting.
Well, you don't want to go on national TV on Jesse Waters' primetime secretary? I mean, that's just crazy.
When we have a deal, I'll describe it to you for sure. But look, that's why you got to give these guys space to work. I mean, they have their own constituencies, okay? They have their own considerations, and you don't want to give away one side's leverage in that regard. But let me just say this about it. I think everyone understands that some of the key elements to bringing this about is, Ukraine has to feel safe moving forward. In essence, they have to believe that at the end of this war, they are in a position to never get invaded again. I think what's also true, and I think it's common sense, and I don't know why it's so hard for a lot of people to understand it, is in any negotiation to bring about the end of a war, or any conflict for that matter, it's going to require both sides to receive, but also to give. In essence, one side's not going to get 100% here. Each side is going to have to make some concessions. And obviously land, or where you draw those lines, where the war stops, is going to be part of that conversation. And it's not easy, and maybe it's not even fair, but it's what it takes in order to bring about an end to a war. And that's has been true in every war. The only wars that don't end that way are the ones that have unconditional surrender by one side or the other. And we're not going to see that in this conflict. So obviously the issue that will be talked about, and the president's been very clear, in the end, what those lines look like are up to Putin and up to Zelensky and up to the Ukrainian side to decide what each one can live with. We are going to be there to facilitate that and make that possible and make sure that both sides are talking. And by the way, President Trump is the only leader in the world, acknowledged by all the Europeans, the only leader in the world that can talk to both of them and bring them both to a meeting is Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States. He's the only one. And the fact that he's willing to do it is something that every American, including Democrats, should be happy that we have a peace president. We should be proud that we have a president that's made peace a priority in his administration.
Absolutely, and I think Zelensky is symbolically already making some concessions because he put on kind of a suit. So that is progress.
It looked good, right?
I think it looked great.
Yeah.
We like to see it.
Yeah.
Well, great job, and keep up the great work. I know it's...
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the lignans. Lignans will help with your endocrine system and your immune system and bring down inflammation. Very important, and it is antioxidant. Turmeric will bring down inflammation and soaks up free radicals because it's an antioxidant. Ashwagandha root helps to control your cortisol levels and your blood glucose levels. When you stack these together, you're going to be helping your immune system and your cardiovascular system. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get this stack. Use it every day and improve your cardiovascular system and your immune system. Another great stack that I have is the following, nattokinase. This is going to help to break up clots and help with your lipid profile. Vitamin D3 helps with gene expression. It's a cofactor for gene expression. It'll help to absorb calcium and help to get cells to go into apoptosis for the ones that need to go into apoptosis. Vitamin K2, MK7, stacks really well with D3 to help with absorbing calcium. If you do resistance training, it's going to help with bone density. And D3 and K2 helps with the cardiovascular system by reducing the amount of calcium that's deposited around plaque formation, and over time you can pull some of that calcium depositing out. Stacking the K2, the D3, and the nattokinase together helps with the cardiovascular stack. So please go to my store, use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last. Now let's listen into Times Radio about Putin's risks revolution. Putin risks Russian revolution echoing 1917.
Their equipment is getting older and older and more obsolete. And meanwhile, he lives in his bunkers and palaces, and he's further away from his people than ever before. I mean, there does come a point when you get to an October Revolution that happened in 1917, if he's not careful. I mean, he has more people repressing his population in uniform with weapons than he has at the front.
So what does it mean for NATO? Peter Caddick-Adams is an academic, defence journalist and historian of NATO. Good evening to you, Peter.
Hello, good evening.
Thank you for joining us on Times Radio. Let's look at the situation as it is on the ground for Ukraine. Lots of talk tonight about security guarantees. We're very unclear about exactly what provision that would involve, whether that would be even considered as part of a deal by Putin. But from what you study and understand, there's no sense that it's going to be a NATO force that would be in position in Ukraine.
Well, no, I mean, America is part of NATO, and there's an enormous reluctance from America to get involved in anything at all. So this is, as it was first labelled by, the Prime Minister, a coalition of the willing. I think that's much, much further down the line, and we've just got to see what kind of beast we're dealing with. I mean, at the moment, Ukraine is still under fire. There's been an air raid tonight with 4 missiles and 140 drones and several deaths. And that's the really important context to remember. While these talks are going on in Washington, D.C., Putin is throwing all he's got at Ukraine.
And what he's got is a seemingly inexhaustible number of troops to call upon, certainly more than Ukraine ultimately would be able to. And this long game, in this sense that although there's a degree of stalemate, or has been since the conflict begun, the momentum is with Putin on the battlefield, and the pressure for Zelensky to come to some sort of deal to end the violence must be there, because the pressure just continues to build from Russia. And
no, I disagree with that. Well, the Russians are really, really hurting. I mean, that's
true, but Putin doesn't care that they're hurt. He really doesn't care that many Russian soldiers are dying if it means he can keep providing new ones to replace them with.
Yeah, and their quality is going down. And although there's a seemingly endless horde, their equipment is getting older and older and more obsolete. And meanwhile, he lives in his bunkers and palaces, and he's further away from his people than ever before. I mean, there does come a point when you get to an October revolution that happened in 1917, if he's not careful. I mean, he has more people repressing his population in uniform with weapons than he has at the front. And that multiple has increased since they've gone to war. So this isn't throwing the entire Russian military machine at Ukraine. It's throwing a fair proportion and an increasing proportion of it at your own population. I mean, that's the bizarre thing. You've got to say, why is Putin even engaging with Trump or anyone else in these talks? And it's because Russia's hurting. Russia's hurting financially because it's not part of the banking system anymore, and the chief Russian sort of key figures aren't allowed to travel. That was one of the reasons why the meeting was held in Ankara, in Anchorage, in Alaska, because the Russians aren't part of the International Criminal Court. There aren't any other places the Russians can go to. So they are really feeling the pressure.
Yeah. But I guess the pressure that has been alleviated somewhat by turning up to Alaska, because up until that point there was a moment where Trump was threatening to put in far greater sanctions, secondary sanctions on Russia.
Yeah.
And since turning up and walking along the red carpet to meet Trump, all talk of sanctions have gone completely. There's been no mention of those today, threatening Putin with more of those. Do you think that is a mistake by the US not to keep that financial, increase that pressure and have some leverage over Putin?
Well, of course, he can always...
Our cars have always had great range and great dynamics. Then to integrate all the functionality that you have in a typical crossover is something that's super important. So the cargo space in the rear, the additional cargo space in the front, full flat seats that give you this wide open area if you need to do it, the towing that we have on the back end, all of that combined, and then saying, you know what, it's still going to be a Tesla when you drive it. I want to make people's understanding of what an EV can be and what a product is, make it a part of your life, a part of your experience. Ultimately, it results in a product people love, and that's when you've hit the right point of vehicle engineering.
When we started using ShareFile, we discovered lots of other really amazing things that build the values of a small business.
Well, of course, he can always reintroduce them. I mean, the trouble about Trump is he's inconsistent. And the only consistent thing we can say about Trump is he's inconsistent, he's unpredictable. So he could easily return to doing that if he just simply gets out of bed the wrong side the following, one morning and decides he's annoyed with Putin all over again. And then that gives him a whole raft of sanctions to to use as leverage again. We don't know whether that will happen or not. I mean, it's just a really, really bizarre sort of situation, which is, of course, why the European leaders rushed over to Washington, D.C. to provide a bit of moral stability and support for President Zelensky, but also to provide a sort of moral compass in all of this, which is just sort of completely lacking in the administration on Capitol Hill.
They're also, according to reports of the FT, providing economic support in the form of $100 billion worth of purchasing of US weapons. Are Europe going to seriously now realise that they are going to have to continually to step up the financial backing of Ukraine when it comes to arming itself, if indeed this security guarantee is likely to come with euros being spent by European countries to North America?
Yeah, and I think that was the point of those European leaders who went were advertising that actually, yes, very much that is something that they've realised they've got to do. And there will be plenty of others, the Baltics, the Poles, and so on. I mean, the Greeks, the Spanish, the Portuguese, much less so. Probably the Belgians the same. I mean, and this is perhaps reflecting also the sort of different administrations in power. But generally, Europe has, or the European members who are part of NATO, have realised they've got to spend more on defence, as indeed have we. It's got to go up to 5%. That's not going to come down anytime soon. It's a rude awakening to the third decade of the 21st century that these are troubled times. Those troubled times aren't going to suddenly go away. And we need to take defence more seriously than we have done since, well, probably 1945. And this has been a long time coming. I mean, the summit in Washington has been a long time coming. This should have happened 3 years ago. This is the summit we've been building up to for a long, long time. But we've, across Europe, there are probably the leaders in place who are in a position, who are really in a position to drive this, like the Germans and President Macron and our own Prime Minister.
Okay. Peter, thank you very much indeed. That's Peter Caddick-Adams, a historian of NATO. Donald Trump says he's already begun making arrangements for a meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelensky. How likely is that really to happen? With me now is Leslie Vinjamori, also a Professor of International Relations at SOAS University of London and Chief Executive of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Good evening to you, Leslie.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. So let's go to that question. Can you see a meeting happening between Presidents Trump, Putin, and Zelensky?
Certainly. Again, the real question is on what terms, with what conditions, to discuss what, and what happens between now and then. I think that President Trump clearly likes these summits, these meetings. There's a lot of press around them. There's certainly some risk attached, but now we've moved, after we got through Alaska, we moved into a space where that is the expectation. There's a momentum in terms of the diplomacy, but the really tough issues, does a ceasefire come first? What does security assurances really mean? What land swaps are being considered? And will President Trump back Zelensky's ambitions and desires on that front, or Vladimir Putin's? All of those things are obviously in play and very uncertain.
Do you expect them, though, needing to be put in place and agreed before that meeting can happen, or can you see a situation where they meet with many of these big, really fundamental questions unresolved?
I think we are in a space now where a meeting could easily take place without things resolved. These are really hard things to resolve, first. Secondly, Donald Trump has made it clear that he doesn't think it's necessary to have a ceasefire in order to get a peace agreement. He's ignoring, of course, the fact that Russia continues to launch attacks on Ukrainian civilians. Vladimir Putin has no interest in having a ceasefire. So either Zelensky says no, which is a very risky thing to do for the president of Ukraine, given that he really needs to keep President Trump on his side and moving forward. For better, for worse, yes, I think it is possible that talks proceed without anything agreed before those talks take place.
Can a peace agreement be established that essentially freezes the conflict as it exists now? The issue of land exchange is not formally recognised. It's held, if you like, the battle lines are drawn and stay where they remain. And those bigger, really thorny questions about ownership of that and who's really in charge, that can come later. Is there a way of having a frozen conflict as opposed to a fully resolved conflict?
I mean, look, these are all.
I used to feel like I was playing cat and mouse with my clients, always chasing them for payments, but now I get paid without the exhaustion. It makes sense that zero.
I mean, look, these are a series of really awful and tough choices. It is not clear right now how you freeze the conflict.
Not just by stopping bombing the country illegally in Russia's case.
Yeah, except that Russia doesn't have any interest in freezing the conflict right now. So in theory, it's a very nice idea. In practice, I don't see how you get there unless the United States decides to really use its leverage to force that. Again, that's a really tall order when you've got a Russian leader that has no interest in stopping unless he gets what he wants. And right now, it doesn't look like he's going to get what he wants.
And in Zelensky and Ukraine's case, can they ever be in a position where they're able to countenance allowing certain amounts of land to be moved to Russia when that's just even constitutionally not allowed? Can you see a scenario at all where a bit of land is kept with Russia and lost from Ukraine?
Maybe, but first of all, de facto as opposed to legal recognition. Secondly, if you were the leader of Ukraine, you don't give that away unless you have absolute confidence about what you're getting in return. What do those security assurances really look like, so that this doesn't just become the thin edge of the wedge of Russia taking more territory? What is America going to do to really shore up that credible deterrence threat against Russia were it to just use, that pause and that land to, rearm, rebuild, restore, and then move back in? Very few people who are deeply expert on Russia believe that, just giving some land away is going to deter Putin. If anything, they think it's going to do the opposite. So, from the point of view of Ukraine is not only risky for Zelensky personally, it's risky for the country. It's obviously risky from a precedent-setting point of view when it comes to international law, geopolitics. We tried to move past a position when you decided the boundaries, the territories of a country by the use of force. We were supposed to have gotten past that with the United Nations Charter. We're 80 years in, and here we are. None of these are good options, but clearly ongoing violent conflict and deep instability is also the worst of all worlds.
How much patience do you expect Donald Trump to have with this? As you say, he likes the show, he likes people turning up there and the cameras of the world being on him. And today is a show, it is for him to be in the spotlight. But can you see him entertaining this as a series, as a sort of repeated effort to get people around the table with nothing being resolved? I mean, there comes a point where he's going to have to say, I'm done with you all because I can't do what I promised to be able to deliver really fast. Does he have the patience for the long haul of this?
That is a very difficult question to answer. If you think of some of the most difficult, protracted conflicts around the world and peace negotiations and talks that have gone on to try to resolve those, some of these processes go on for months, if not years. Whether President Trump would personally stay engaged, it's difficult to imagine that. He might come in at different points, but this is a dangerous and urgent situation that unfortunately many people think will drag on for a very long time. But will Donald Trump simply walk away from it? I actually think that that's quite difficult to imagine right now. I think he wants this. He wants to see the situation change, ideally resolved, but at least change. He wants to be able to claim some success, but I actually think he genuinely wants to be successful as well as to claim it. So he is going to get frustrated, but washing his hands of it seems very unlikely right now.
We're going to be going to Bloomberg shortly here, but please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the elderberry zinc lozenges, 21 count in each bag, or the drops, which are smaller than the lozenges. I have 3 different flavors: blueberry, cherry flavor, and also honey and lemon. Get a few bags for your household, mitigate that sore irritation in the throat, especially if it's during the allergy season or the cold season. If you're having that throat irritation, take the lozenges and drops right away to mitigate it. Use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. I also have gels. I have it in the quick dispenser and in the tube form. It's a dual purpose product. You can use it as a daily skincare. It'll help to heal a wound. You can use it as an aftershave. You can also use it if you're not feeling well or someone around you is not feeling well. And you put it on your hands, put it around your eyes, around your nose, around your ears, around your mouth. Lightly coat your nostrils. It stays active for 5.5 hours. You can't do that with Perel. This is very high quality gels. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Make sure you have some because of the season that is starting to come upon us in the fall and the winter. So it's really important to be prepared. Also, I have structural nano silver toothpaste. Whitens your teeth, freshens your breath, helps with your gum line health, reduces inflammation. Very high quality toothpaste, has no fluoride. You won't be able to find a better toothpaste than this. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nano silver toothpaste. Use discount 5 and you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last.
Today that there's actually been a wider range when it comes to metal tariffs, which we're going to be talking later on this hour with our political panel.
Well, that's right, Tyler. We are seeing an expansion of these tariffs into more consumer goods. And one of the big concerns, of course, is that consumers will start feeling the pinch. Now, the Trump administration has been loath to acknowledge this and has really pushed back against the idea that these tariffs are having any kind of an effect on voters' pocketbooks. And yet we are seeing signs that these costs are beginning to be passed along.
It is something that everybody is watching closely, from the markets to policymakers as well. We'll be diving into that conversation shortly here, as well as a conversation about what is happening when it comes to talks with Ukraine. Bloomberg's Eric Martin is here next. He was there at the White House.
All right, let's take a look at what's going on with some of the other news.
Faster. However, top line is, my takeaway is that the most powerful man in the world met Donald Trump, and the two of them sat down together and almost inexplicably went through the list of things that Putin said he wants and agreed to all of them pretty much, and went through the list of things that President Trump has said that he wants, and again inexplicably said no to pretty much all of them. If you recall, there was this whole thing about serious consequences, 50 days, 5 days, secondary tariffs, sanctions, and so on. I mean, ducking. So yeah, it didn't happen. So my take on this is that Putin ran that visit, Putin ran that show.
How do you think it might go from here? It seemed to have a pretty constructive meeting yesterday with the European leaders, many of them, including Mr. Zelensky. How do you think this is going to play out in the days coming forward?
Well, President Zelensky, I mean, is the bravest man in the world, so he always does the best that he can. He has a very difficult position. It's the case that Ukraine is suffering. The Russians have mobilized such that they can slowly win a war of attrition. I got in a bit of hot water in your show last time because I said that Putin was slowly losing. What I should have said is Putin could slowly lose if we give the Ukrainians the kit and the weapons, which we're not. So hopefully the Europeans and Zelensky are able to get into some sort of peace deal so that the war ends, which is a noble end, but one that allows at least what's left of Ukraine to survive. And I think Putin has long-term aspirations for the rest of it.
Do you think we'll get to that next step of Russia and Ukraine sitting down for talks, and then after that, a trilateral?
We might, but so much of this is theatre, right? I mean, with the president, with Zelensky, the way they treated him in the Oval Office last time, there's always this tail risk. Well, not even a tail risk. There's also a probability that this is going to go south for Zelensky. And really, what is Putin's word? What is Putin's word worth anyway? Right. So even if there is this trilateral meeting and Putin says, "Yeah, I agree to X, Y, Z," I mean, we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years that he's willing to break any agreement anyway. So I think the essence of this needs to be that the Ukrainians do not agree to anything that means that they cannot either stay mobilized or remobilize if Russia starts the war again.
How concerned do you think those European allies were that came to Washington yesterday, and the other Europeans? How concerned are they about Russia's greater aspirations years down the road here? Because you can argue right now is when they need to draw a line in the sand, a big line.
Okay, so as an Englishman on your show, I'm going to say something strange. World peace now rests on whether or not Germany rearms, which is not something I thought I'd hear myself say.
Right.
If the Germans don't get their act together and create a Bundeswehr that can really fight and defeat the Russians in the field, such that it is a deterrent, the Russians will keep coming. And that is not just an assessment of Putin, that is an assessment of Russian history. And if we really want to be analytical about it, we should understand that the Russians have had a history in which, as far as they're concerned, they are perpetually invaded by the Europeans. It's not just the Germans. There were Romanians, Italians, and so on. And they had that war with the Finns and so on. So I think we can expect a long-term Russian posture which is aggressive. I think the European leaders understand this, and now they just need to rearm very quickly.
My head is spinning on this. In the last minute we have left here, the security plan that they were talking about. I mean, what do you think? What's the overall kind of look for that? I mean, not what does it include, because we really don't know the specifics on it. But what's the overall goal of it?
For whom? You see,
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, true.
Okay, so let's just go quickly through the three leaders. The goal for Putin is to basically retool. If he agrees to a pause, it won't be an end to the war. He wants to retool, try again later, because the initial invasion failed. The goal for Zelensky, of course, is to keep sovereignty, to keep his country as intact and as powerful as possible. I think the goal for the Europeans is to support Ukraine. And the goal for President Donald Trump appears to be twofold. One, do whatever Vladimir Putin tells him to do. And number two, somehow, some way get a Nobel Peace Prize. So I'm that cynical about it, I'm afraid.
It took me far too long to realize that you...
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the collagen. Collagen will help with your skin, your nails, and your hair. Also, musculature, bone density, cartilage, joint health. Very important to take every day. Do resistance training. Take 1 scoop a day, mix it with soft foods or filtered water, milk, or even a smoothie, but take it every day. And do resistance training, super important. Good night formula will help you to get into the 5 cycles of REM sleep and deep sleep so you can consolidate memory, detoxify your central nervous system, and to be well rested. It has tryptophan, melatonin, GABA, and passion flower. It's very important to have those cycles of REM sleep regularly so you're slowing down the aging process. Myotrol helps with the gene expression to build muscle. Do resistance training, take Myotrol, so you're building muscle and maintaining muscle. Super important if you're 40 years of age or older. But Myotrol will help you if you're an athlete that's younger or older. And you don't have to be an athlete to take Myotrol. It's really important to take. Clarity Factor will get rid of that brain fog, help support memory. And over time, what you're going to notice is that your dendritic connections are going to improve. You're going to have positive neuroplasticity. You're going to be thinking faster. Your memory is going to be quicker. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and take the Clarity Factor. Make sure you drink it with filtered water. And detoxify your body. It's really important to drink filtered water, stay away from processed foods, clean your environment in your home, get rid of chemicals that you don't need, and take zeolite. Take 3 small drops of zeolite underneath your tongue and drink filtered water. This will bind to heavy metals, toxins, and chemicals and allow you to urinate them out within 6 to 8 hours. Take it every day. If you want a heavier detox, take 10 small drops underneath your tongue, drink the filtered water, and do that every day until the bottle's done. Do that once or twice a year. But it's better to do 3 small drops underneath your tongue every day. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, get the zeolite, the clarity factor, the Myotrol, the Good Night formula, and the collagen. It's a great stack because you're helping with your bone density and your skin and your joint health. You're getting better sleep. You're slowing down the aging process. You're improving your mental acuity with clarity factor. You're helping to build muscle and maintain muscle with Myotrol, and you're detoxifying your body with zeolite. That right there is a powerful stack. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you do get a free gift until supplies last. Back to Bloomberg.
From a long time now, trying to avoid forever wars, unlimited U.S. commitments, and this certainly seems like it could be one if you have U.S. soldiers in Ukraine.
Eric, we saw a lot of talk yesterday from European leaders in addition to security guarantees, but also to President Donald Trump's idea of having a bilateral meeting between President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky to set the stage for further talks. Do we see any sign that Putin and his coterie of aides in Moscow are aboard with this idea? What has been their response so far?
That's a great question, Mike, because we know that President Putin, a lot of the analysis has been that he is going to hold out. He's avoided meeting with President Zelensky. We know that this is a scenario that potentially having Zelensky at the table makes him somewhat uncomfortable, as some of our reporting has shown. And so waiting to see when this will be scheduled and if it will be scheduled. Ushakov, the spokesman for the Kremlin, said that he did confirm that President Trump raised the idea in this incredible 40-minute call yesterday where he took a break from meeting with European leaders to call President Putin from the Oval Office, but not seeing yet confirmation that President Putin has accepted the idea of a bilateral meeting, seeing some comments from European leaders in meeting, Friedrich Merz, for example, saying he expects this maybe in the next couple of weeks, President Macron of France saying that he expects a trilateral, which was the original idea that President Trump had raised as the next step, sometime in maybe the next 3 weeks, but still waiting, and this criminology, right? Trying to read exactly what the signs are coming from Moscow and what it all means.
All right, Bloomberg's Eric Martin, thank you so much for being here, your reporting and your insight on really, Mike, what was a very big day at the White House when it came to the future of what our European allies are going to do to help get a deal potentially over the finish line.
Like Ukraine, we see this as an existential question in terms of the U.S. relationship, the transatlantic ties that have been such a bedrock of global security for all these years.
Right. A lot to follow, and we're going to go from foreign policy now to domestic policy. We heard from our very own Bloomberg's Michael McKee earlier in this hour. He had the chance to sit down with the Fed Vice Chair of Supervision, Michelle Bowman, and asked her about the future of the Basel III Endgame proposal. She, of course, gave us an interesting update to hear.
I think what we're looking at doing is going back to the original Basel Agreement from 2017 to make sure that we're hewing closely to what that agreement included. We've also seen that every other jurisdiction around the world that's subject to the Basel requirements has already published their requirements. So we want to make sure that we understand what those requirements are as we're looking to frame our own proposal.
We're joined now by Nathan Dean, our colleague here in Washington, from Bloomberg Intelligence, an expert on all things when it comes to financial policy. We are still talking about Basel III, and how much longer will we be talking about it? What is the end game here? can this really get through, and what are the next steps in seeing this change that she's talking about, Michelle Bowman is talking about adopting?
Yeah, so the exciting news is that Governor Bowman said that we were going to have a proposal early next year. It would come at the end of her 4 pillars. Now we have 4 proposals, leverage ratio, which is already out.
Let's listen to General Keane.
Surflake's patented wave-generating technology creates perfect ocean-like waves in a safe, controlled water park environment, backed by world champion surfers and
So President Trump hosting a historic meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky and European leaders at the White House as he pushes for peace in Ukraine. Trump saying a ceasefire would not be necessary to end the war, but exchanges of territory may be. Watch.
I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. We also need to discuss the possible exchanges of territory, taking into consideration the current line of contact. That means the war zone, the war lines that are pretty obvious.
Joining us now is retired 4-star General Chairman of the Institute of the Study of War and Fox News Senior Strategic Analyst, General Jack King. General, thanks so much for joining the program this morning.
Yeah, delighted to be here, Lawrence.
So, General, before we go into the maps and the exchange of territory, tell us about the image yesterday and the words that were said. I don't think we've ever seen a president demand and command the room the way the president did yesterday with all of these European leaders, and they seem to be working together.
Yeah, it's hard. You can't overstate the significance of what we all witnessed, and to describe it as you have and others as historic, it certainly is factual. But we have to note a couple things here as well. The president has a real meaningful relationship with those leaders, and you could see how comfortable they were in a room with him, even with the cameras on. And that is a result of a working relationship that he has established with some of them in the first administration, but with all of them in the 6 months to 7 months of this administration is quite remarkable. And to underscore that, after the summit meeting that he had with Putin, at 1 a.m. in the morning, he began calling him Saturday morning on his way home in Air Force One. He finished those calls, Lawrence, at 2:30 in the morning, sitting on a tarmac. And he asked them to come to Washington on Monday. Now, Saturday morning, when he's talking to them, where they are, obviously, and they had to get on their airplanes the next day and come to Washington for that meeting. And what we saw there is the undisputed global leader sitting down with the prominent leaders in Europe and President Zelensky discuss a pathway forward for peace. And it is stunning. And the other thing that's about this, and you got to give the president credit for the Friday meeting and certainly what's happening here, he knows that this image that Putin is looking at will have an impact on him. Right? Well, what does the president do? He calls Putin before the meeting, and he calls him during the meeting, likely before he goes to bed, because he's X number of hours ahead of us, and make sure that he's still in the game. Keeping him informed, because the objective here at the end of the day, as we all know, is Zelensky and Putin have to come to some kind of an agreement, and the president acknowledges that. And he will likely play a part, obviously, in that as well. It was quite a spectacle to see that. And when you look at the Oval Office scene as you have portrayed here, you can also see, again, on the faces of those leaders, how comfortable they are being with the president. And that sends volumes. They are here because of the president, but they're also here because of their national interest. They know full well that Putin wants Ukraine as an anchor to expand into Eastern Europe. And that is in their national interest to prevent him from having Ukraine as an anchor and denying him the ability then to expand into Eastern Europe. So their national interests at stake, the protection of their own people and security is at stake for sure, but they're here working on it in harmony together because of President Trump's leadership.
So to that point, General, as we put the map, this is some of the territory that Putin wants, and this is the territory that he already has. And you talk about that image, General. How does Putin respond to that image? Even though the president called him last night, even between some of these meetings, he stepped outside to talk to Putin. How does he respond to that image that was there of unity?
Well, I think it certainly has to have some impact on him. He already knows that he's internationally isolated by invading Ukraine. He already knows that there's sanctions imposed on him from the European nations and from the United States. He does have partners, and those partners are all authoritarian regimes that are up to malfeasance themselves in China, Iran, and North Korea. So certainly he got the message, that there is unity here, that there is a not only they're coming together, but the way they come together, the way they talk to each other, you can feel the commitment and the resolve in moving towards peace being led by the president. He gets that message, and they are determined. And I think, Lawrence, the fact that they spent much of the day together talking about two things: how do we get a peace agreement? But the second thing is critical to getting a peace agreement. And that second thing is, how do we prevent Putin from reattacking once we have a peace agreement? Because that is what he's always done. How do we do that? And you can see what's happened here. As a result of that having real multinational security guarantees that they discussed on the table, that gives Zelensky running room in terms of options that he may be willing to pursue. And he's actually said it, into a land deal as long as it's proportionate. He wouldn't have said that if he hadn't heard that there's going to be guarantees with multinational troops likely backed by air power, build up him militarily, because China, Iran, North Korea are going to do the same for Russia once there's a peace agreement. But the crucial thing is stopping Putin from reattacking. And that really opens the door for Zelensky to move in with a counteroffer that could possibly lead to a peace agreement with Putin. Listen, there's hard work ahead. And the president knows that full well. But look, this is a major step that has been taken here. It started Friday, and aren't we now past all the nonsense of red carpet images, flyovers, clapping for Putin coming towards the president? Let's get past all that nonsense. Not that the flyover was nonsense. I thought that sent an unbelievable message to Putin. But we spent 2 days talking about that stuff.
That was all the media going crazy, and they wanted the analysts to pick up on that bait. But we saw yesterday the real work done. In general, you've been spot on with your analysis from the very beginning. Thank you so much for joining the program this morning. Have a good day.
I'm Steve Ducey. I'm Brighteon Channel.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube.
It all depends on the man in the Kremlin, and he thinks he's winning this war. So it's not clear to me why you should make Donald Trump the great peacemaker who ends it, and that Putin has to go back in his box and doesn't get almost anything that he wants except possibly a slice, a large chunk of Donbass. That's not why he started this war. It was entirely for different reasons.
Delighted to have James Nixie from the Conflict Studies Research Centre with me. James,
an Oval Office meeting on Monday that didn't end in angry scenes and excruciating scenes. Will Zelensky be relieved or maybe hopeful today?
Yeah, I know. Remarkable, isn't it? The turnaround since February. Yeah, relief is surely one of the things, because ambush or some form of repetition, the fact that Putin spoke to Trump last, would all have worried the Europeans. And I think Zelensky must have been very grateful. He had so many prominent Europeans flanking him up. I mean, those were remarkable, unprecedented scenes. So many, if you will, powerful people in one room at one moment.
Exceed every expectation in the new 2026 Infiniti QX60 from Douglas Infiniti. Designed with distinction, the QX60 seamlessly blends sophistication and first-class comfort. From its driver-focused cabin with available massaging front row seats to advanced driver assistance and technology features, the QX60 keeps you comfortable and in command. Click now to learn more.
Real powerful people in one room at once. I suppose with the twin aim of ensuring that Zelensky didn't rise to any bait if he was offered any, and ensuring that Trump didn't go wobbly in terms of pushing all of Vladimir Putin's designs and desires onto Zelensky all at once. So it was a well-constructed, well-thought-out, I don't know, almost reverse ambush, I suppose. I mean, I suppose the Americans would not have ideally liked all of those Europeans there. They'd forced themselves into the room effectively. And then it's much harder to browbeat 7 or 8 people than just one from one small nation, which he doesn't really clearly care that much about. So I think it was quite a remarkable effort from the European leaders, quite frankly, as well as Zelensky himself, who performed admirably.
For Zelensky, the positive takeaway that he's been talking about is Trump's pledge of security assistance. That Zelensky says will be formalized soon. What's your sense of what that mooted security guarantee could look like?
Well, what they want it to look like is very similar to Article 5, whereby NATO, whereby an attack against one is an attack against all. And that would be the ideal. Although it should be said that Article 5 doesn't automatically mean, in NATO terms, that everybody suddenly joins in the bun fight. In fact, what it means is they get together and decide what to do in defense of the injured party. But my sense is this has been slightly over-egged, and that this is not a cast iron security guarantee in the way that Article 5 is supposed to be. It's hard to see some countries committing troops on the ground in Ukraine, fighting in particular in the air as well, by the way, because that has been such a bugbear for the MAGA crowd in particular, although I understand that some things are changing within that particular policy. So that's one thing. So I do think that this is, my understanding is that these security guarantees are sub-Article 5. In fact, quite frankly, that they would be in deference to the United Nations, which obviously contains Russia on the permanent file of the Security Council, and that Russia would have to authorize it themselves. So that's really like, turkeys and Christmas. So I'm skeptical here, but mostly I'm skeptical here. And I'm sorry to be such a sort of a downcast pessimist, but because it does seem to me that if you take this optimistic scenario whereby Ukraine draws the lines, underline the contract right now, and you have a peacekeeping force of some sort, a reassurance force of some sort, and that Vladimir Putin is effectively put back in his place, that just doesn't sound like Vladimir Putin to me. So I think the one thing that I have noticed as being absent from all the analysis that we've seen in the last sort of less than 24 hours is what Russia's reaction is. And that's partly because we don't know, because they haven't reacted properly yet as far as I've seen this morning. And because it does go against the very core of what Vladimir Putin wants. And we know kind of what he wants from the November and December so-called security treaties or ultimata, which gave Ukraine sort of a matter of weeks to fulfill them before Russia would invade. It wasn't possible to do so because it required NATO retreating to pre-1991 lines, amongst other things, and I think it requires a little bit of psychological analysis of Vladimir Putin to understand that he is not a man to compromise, not one for ceding territories, not one for accepting that Ukraine has, or the West has any business doing anything in Ukraine, up to and including EU membership, never mind NATO membership. Vladimir Putin regards Ukraine as an indelible part of Russia, that Russia cannot be Russia without Ukraine being part of it or attached to it as you wish. So I think that the flying moment is still to come in a way. I mean, I suppose much as we think that the US has drifted, and I'm sure that's correct, in the last 6 months, then ultimately they are all mature liberal democracies with a question mark on the liberal, shall we say. And that has meant that it has not been, that's an easier proposition than negotiating with somebody who doesn't hold the same standards, values, isn't bound by a treaty. And so therefore, if you go back to your security guarantees question, then the question is how to make it less like the Budapest Memorandum, which was trampled all over, and more like Article 5 of NATO. And the devil in that detail is yet to be sorted.
Ahead of this meeting in the Oval Office, the Kremlin again said no NATO troops in Ukraine, which perhaps would suggest any kind of security guarantees involving other countries, perhaps the type of countries that get involved in UN peacekeeping forces may be satisfactory to Russia?
Possibly. It counts out the Turks, of course, because the Turks are in NATO. The Chinese have been mooted, but it's very unclear that the Chinese want such a thing. It's a little bit hard to see where they might come from. Mercenaries have been mooted, but again, that would not be acceptable to, I think, the Western powers and to Ukraine in particular. So it doesn't strike me as being it's easier said than done. I mean, if you're looking at scrabbling around for ideas, then of course the other point is maybe not so much troops on the ground but planes in the air, whereby they do go back to creating a no-fly zone or a bubble or a series of interconnected bubbles, which would also give the Ukrainians some respite. But of course, for that, in a sense, for that you need the ceasefire. The ceasefire is not coming; it's a peace deal now.
Style and substance. In the GMC Sierra, or current eligible GMC.
But the ceasefire is not coming; it's a peace deal now.
And I suppose long term, any kind of arrangement like that would risk countries being committed for decades to stop this just from restarting again, as we see with Cyprus after 1974 or Sinai.
Absolutely, and you can't see NATO planes, for example, circling the Ukrainian airways, ad infinitum. It's simply not. It's not economically or physically possible. So that's why I think that it's great that the Europeans and the Ukrainians seem to have more or less brought Donald Trump on side for now, although obviously he can blow hot and cold, swing one way and then another, depending upon the last person he speaks to. He could go back to either to Putin or even to Vance and Rubio and change his mind within hours, I suppose. But as far as it's just it's very hard to see the Russians agreeing to what the Western media seems to think has been put in place already.
Donald Trump, for now, says he's arranging a meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelensky that some say could come in the next 2 weeks. Do you think Vladimir Putin will go to Hungary or wherever it may be? And is there any point with Ukraine all but rejecting Russia's continuing demand to hand over more territory.
I mean, I find it hard to imagine that Vladimir Putin would deign to sit down at the same table with Volodymyr Zelensky, something he hasn't done since the mid-2010s. He obviously, the person who doesn't go to the table will look like the more spoiled of the children, and he will, and I think Zelensky will do that on the basis that he has promised that he would do. Yeah, I think he would be obligated to turn up. Worth noting that President Macron has counter-suggested a quad format, whereby Europe is in there in some position, meaning him, I think, representing Europe. That would, of course, give Zelensky a little bit of extra ballast on his side if Trump and Putin decide to gang up on him. Not an impossibility as we've seen before. Yeah, it's possible, but I think, again, I hate to keep coming down to the same point, but I think it all depends upon the man in the Kremlin, and he thinks he's winning this war. So it's not clear to me why he should make Donald Trump the great peacemaker who ends it, and that Putin has to go back in his box and doesn't get almost anything that he wants except possibly a slice, a large chunk of Donbass. That's not why he started this war, but it was entirely for different reasons.
Whether a trilateral meeting with Trump, a quadrilateral meeting with Macron as well, is there a route to peace that would work for Vladimir Putin, that would be palatable to Zelensky and to the people of Ukraine? Is there a middle way that we can find?
I have my doubts. Sorry to be the fly in the ointment yet again, because I think if you think about Vladimir Putin is 72, almost 73, and he started this war probably knowing that he's got more years behind him than in front of him, and that he hasn't achieved what he wants for the gathering of Russian lands for the greatness of Ukraine. So he used this muscular military option because the diplomatic options of telling Ukraine where it should be geopolitically positioned, simply wasn't working. So that can't have changed. It doesn't seem to have changed. And of course, one thing that's been consistent in the last, not just in recent weeks, the tumult of recent weeks, the fluidity of recent weeks, and of recent years, is that Russia's position seems to be unchanged. They haven't conceded anything to our knowledge. So, I mean, I know Bitchute said that they had conceded that the Western Security Assistance Form package, but in fact, that does not look like a concession because if you flip that, then actually that means that the US has to get Russian permission to do security in Europe. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't think there's any concession at all, and probably Steve Bitchute misunderstood that willfully or unwillfully. So to go back to the question of any sort of realistic chance of a viable peace, I think that's very difficult while Russia still believes it's in a strong position. If it thinks it can win on the battlefield and it's not going to economically collapse, and neither of it, and it's not, by the way, at least not in the immediate future. Obviously, it's systemically massively challenged, bearing in mind what it's doing to its economy, but it's okay for now. Unless things are much worse, I suppose the caveat I'd put on that is unless things are worse for Russia than we realise, as they were at the end of the Soviet times, when it collapsed sooner than almost all analysts understood. When it came fast. So I would imagine that actually the battlefield situation is not conducive, is not aligned to a diplomatic settlement, despite the political will for it.
So what happens in Ukraine if Zelensky agrees to a settlement that perhaps meets most of Putin's maximalist demands? Do we see civil unrest there, or does Ukraine just have to walk away from this whole process and perhaps hand a propaganda victory to Russia again?
So I was in Ukraine 3 weeks ago, and I happened to be there during the protests on the anti-corruption issue. And it was quite extraordinary to see the people of Ukraine come out in defiance of their government, but saying quite crucially that, listen, we support our government, we support Zelensky in the war, but not in this anti-corruption maneuver, which is outrageous, and we didn't fight and die for this. So I think that Zelensky must be aware that he has got one of the most politically sensitive populations in the world who are able to mobilize and come out on the street if they are betrayed. So what does being betrayed mean? Would they be willing to cede some land? And the answer to that is quite possibly yes, if it weren't for a problem that it's not about land. Because this is not about land for Russia. I mean, it's about control. Russia needs to control Ukraine. It doesn't need Ukraine's land per se. It just had to go in that way, as I say, because it wasn't getting it any other way. So if Zelensky cedes control of some sort, then I think that is a more dangerous position for him politically. If he were to say, listen, can't get you Crimea, can't get you some of Donbass, then that might be accepted by the Ukrainian population temporarily, but not having it codified. One of the problems might be in codification, because, of course, part of the Russian demands are to ensure that this is accepted de jure, not just de facto.
To circle back to where we started, Monday's Oval Office meeting, it's clear there's a clear aggressor and a clear victim here. Will Donald Trump, or has Donald Trump come to appreciate this?
I mean, it's very...
In today's data-fueled, always-on environment, innovation is key. It's time to reimagine and modernize your data infrastructure. Break free.
I mean, it's very hard to say, isn't it? Because it's like sort of trying to nail down what with Donald Trump. I mean, you think you might have an agreement, and then it comes out differently on the other side, or then he talks to somebody else, or then he talks to his advisors, talks to his adversaries, then goes back to talking to us. And so you just don't know quite where he stands. If it's any consolation, then that does off-put or wrong-foot the Russians as much as it does us. They equally, presumably, cannot know where Donald Trump stands, unless there's something that they know that we don't about him being a Russian asset. But if you ignore that for a second, then I think that it's much more likely that this is, because we're not dealing with a professional politician, he doesn't really have the deftness or the skills to act and stay acted upon. His style of governance is so much more singular and centralized around himself, and everybody else scrabbling to keep up, as we've seen in his entourage, who did not support him, but of course now very much do so. And so it's really hard to pinpoint Donald Trump. I mean, I do say that frequently, but Vladimir Putin is much easier to understand. We can understand his motivations, his background, his writings, his speeches, and there is quite, and also in addition to that, there's a great deal of consistency. And Donald Trump is nothing if not inconsistent. And so I don't know if he has come around, or if this is simply the latest maneuver in a shambolic or not shambolic, effort to sort of muddle through this. He's obviously claiming that that's what he wants peace. And actually, you know what? I believe that. I think he does want this war over. That is true, and that's possibly, that is different to his Russian counterpart. Vladimir Putin probably wants the war to continue because he thinks he is winning it, and he can get more on the battlefield than he can around the table. But whether that's enough for an intrinsically pro-Russian, but for an administration which is at least more pro-great power and more anti-little power. Calling Ukraine a little power is a bit strange, but than before. So yeah, it's not clear to me that Donald Trump has been won over, but I would regard Monday as a success for Western liberal powers and Ukraine after the nerves that were created in the immediate aftermath of Alaska.
James Nixie, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure. Really appreciate that. It all depends upon.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Max 35. Max 35 is 35 parts per million. You take a teaspoon a day, swish in your mouth, gargle, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and then swallow it. What it will do is help with your immune system. It'll boost it up. It's going to help the health of the epithelial lining, help the health of your oral cavity and your oral pharynx, and increase your mucosal barrier. By doing that, it boosts up your immune system. Do it every day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or two a day. If someone around you is not feeling well, take a tablespoon or two a day. Once everything is all clear, go back to your maintenance dose. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Max 35.
Ahead, we'll bring you all of the updates, including an interview with Sir Peter Westmacott, former UK ambassador to the United States. He'll be here to talk about all the latest updates when it comes to the war in Ukraine, as this White House ramps up the pressure for there to be momentum on the way forward. And it's not just our allies that are under pressure from the White House, but Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, too. This week, our very own Michael McKee is live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, fresh off of an interview with Fed Vice Chair of Supervision Michelle Bowman, who Michael Shepard is a contender to potentially lead the central bank once Powell vacates his post as the chair.
Her name has come up in discussions, but she was careful to demur on her interest and really focus on the task that she has as the Vice Chair of Supervision. She has a big task ahead of her, as she outlined in her interview with Mike, laying out the efforts to address what she referred to as debanking, the issue affecting crypto, but also, as President Donald Trump signaled in his executive order, perhaps some ideological bias behind banks' behavior, too, when it comes to customers.
Right, exactly. And there's other big stories that we're following here as well on Bloomberg, and we'll be talking about them throughout the hour, including one that I know that you watch closely, which has to do with the U.S. potentially here becoming a stakeholder in Intel.
Well, that's right. And this is a key moment, really, for the tech industry, and especially for an iconic chip maker. And that is whether the U.S. government will proceed with taking, as our colleagues here at Bloomberg have scooped, a 10% stake in Intel, and it will make the U.S. government the largest shareholder in this company. And it's something that's moving shares as we speak, Tyler. And let's go to Charlie Pellet, the voice of Bloomberg Radio and the New York Subway, for the latest on the markets.
Thank you very much. Very kind. We have got to Intel shares. Got to begin there because that stock's surging 7%. Certainly a topic of conversation. One we'll have more on coming up on Balance of Power. But the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, right now we are at just about the lows of the day. Got to begin with NASDAQ because I'm looking at a sell-off that is intensifying there with the NASDAQ Composite Index down now by 313 points. That is a drop of 1.5%. Keeping it all in context, the S&P just above 6,400, down 40 now, a decline there of 0.6%. Dow Industrials down 13 on the Dow, a drop of just under 0.1%. A slide in the world's largest tech companies weighing on stocks. Big box retailers getting a boost from Home Depot's numbers this morning. Home Depot up now by 3%. The 10-year 4.30%, with the 2-year currently yielding 3.74%. Gold down $15 the ounce, 33.17. A drop there of just about 0.4%. While West Texas Intermediate crude 62.44 a barrel, down 1.5%. And Bitcoin right now is lower. Bitcoin down 2.7% at 113,385 on Bitcoin. Meta Platforms is splitting its newly formed artificial intelligence group into 4 distinct teams and reassigning many of the company's existing AI employees. It's an attempt to better capitalize on billions of dollars worth of recently acquired talent. All of this, according to an internal memo. Meta Platform shares, they are trading lower now by 2.1%. Recapping, stocks declining, S&P down 39, down 0.6%. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now, wherever you get your podcast. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Tyler Kendall and Michael Shepard.
Before we do that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the vitamin B complex. Vitamin B complex will boost up your cellular metabolism and increase your ATP levels. The first 4 B vitamins helps with the electron transport chain, which is in your mitochondria, to boost up those ATP levels. Also, vitamin B complex through vitamin B12 helps to protect your neurons.
That an initial demand from the Kremlin was for Ukraine to abandon its defense industry, abandon Western military flows. We heard from President Trump earlier today, speaking in an interview with Fox News, laying out the stakes of what's happening here.
I hope President Putin is going to be good, and if he's not, it's going to be a rough situation. And I hope that President Zelensky will do what he has to do. He has to show some flexibility also. They're not going to be a part of NATO, but we've got the European nations, and they'll front load it, and they'll have some of them, France and Germany, a couple of them, UK. They want to have boots on the ground. Not in. I don't think it's going to be a problem, to be honest with you. I think Putin is tired of it.
Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's national security reporter Natalia Drozdiak, who has been following this story, helps lead our coverage when it comes to foreign policy here at Bloomberg. And Natalia, I felt like one of the big takeaways yesterday was that we did see these firmer commitments from the White House, from President Trump, when it comes to a U.S.-backed security guarantee. But do we have any details on what this is actually going to look like in principle?
Well, we did hear a bit more from President Trump today. I mean, he basically rolled out U.S. troops on the ground and described a bit about potentially having air support to provide a sort of backstop to Western forces that would monitor some sort of peace in Ukraine once they reach that deal. But, as you mentioned at the top of this, they're still trying to hash out the details right now. So we know that the national security advisors from Ukraine, the U.S., and the European nations are all trying to figure that out right now, especially ahead of the next meetings.
Natalia, I wanted to bring up the next meeting and the idea from President Donald Trump, and one shared by the European counterparts who were there yesterday, would be a bilateral sit-down between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky. But how would that work without perhaps a chaperone, for lack of a better word? And what sort of neutral location would even be feasible, given perhaps some of the U.S. president's estrangement of other neutral locations potentially through tariffs? Switzerland and Brazil.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, first off, we need to get Putin to actually commit to this because we haven't actually seen that yet. The Russians put out a statement yesterday saying they were exploring the idea of looking at more senior Russian and Ukrainian officials talking, but they didn't say anything specifically about Putin actually doing this. So we have to see first. But then in terms of where this actually takes place, I think it's a really great question. Switzerland was an idea that was thrown out there, but that's a country that has really clashed with Trump over trade, so that's pretty much ruled out. Hungary is another option, but they have been a thorn in the Ukrainian side for many years, especially over the prospects of EU accession. So that seems unlikely. I think one area or one place where it might be possible would be in Turkey, because we've seen the last round of talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians at the lower level in May were held in Turkey, so that might be an option.
Just in our final minute that we have with you, Natalia, what sort of reaction did we see from our European allies? Half a dozen of them descended here in Washington yesterday. I believe it was the German chancellor who said that this meeting actually exceeded his expectations.
Yeah, I think we can't, explain enough how much anxiety there was going into this meeting from the Ukrainian and the European leaders, just given what they had seen on Friday when Putin and Trump had their big summit in Alaska. There was a lot of concern that Trump had essentially swung behind Putin and was disregarding concerns from the Ukrainian side. And, after they met, there was a huge sense of relief also because there wasn't another blow up in the Oval Office between Zelensky and Trump as we had seen in February. But then not only that, they also managed to pin Trump down on the security guarantee part.
All right, Natalia Drozdiak, we thank you always for your coverage, a reporter here at Bloomberg News covering national security.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the omega-3. Omega-3 will help with your cardiovascular health, bring down systemic inflammation, help you to bring down LDL levels and increase your HDL levels. By lowering your LDL levels and increasing your HDL levels, you're reducing the formation of plaque buildup in your vascular system. It's very important to take omega-3 every day. Another great supplement that I have to help with your pancreas is digestive enzyme complex. This will help you to break up the carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. They'll be easier to digest, less stress on your pancreas. If you work out, let's say you're an athlete, taking your pre-workout fuel source or your post-workout fuel source, make sure you take the digestive enzyme complex to help you break down that fueling. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. You spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last. Get the digestive enzyme complex and the omega-3, help with your cardiovascular health and your pancreatic health.
Arms, no U.S. troops on the ground, no call for a ceasefire yet. What is your read on the state of the American president's commitment to actually securing Ukraine for the long term?
Well, I think what he's trying to do at the moment is to head off the demands that there have been from President Zelensky and from a number of European governments for Ukraine to be considered as a credible member of NATO. That is anathema, of course, to Putin, who doesn't want to have NATO on his doorstep. He doesn't grasp, of course, that NATO is a voluntary alliance that is defensive of countries, many of which were once under the Russian jackboot. He wants to rebuild the Russian Empire, regardless of the wishes of the countries and the governments concerned. But leave that to one side. He has a real problem about Ukraine becoming eventually a member of NATO. Now, if that's not going to be part of the deal, and it perhaps can't be, then some sort of really strong military guarantees are going to be important. And that brings us to your point about how is that going to work? President Trump says no American boots on the ground. I don't know whether the French and the Germans and the British will want to have troops on the ground, but they will want to have them not very far away in the event that things do go wrong. Of course, although President Trump says that hundreds of billions of dollars of American taxpayers' money have been spent on Ukraine so far, it's not entirely true. And of all the money that's gone on military equipment, 83% of it has gone to American defense companies. So, it's not been just handouts. And so it's not surprising that he says that if there's to be more money, more arms, that they should be paid for by the Europeans. But it's already largely being paid for, shall we say. And it's already been good business for the American companies. But by saying we will strengthen Ukraine's defensive capabilities, with this military equipment, then I think he's putting in place a credible alternative, I hope, to the possibility of eventual NATO enlargement. That's what that's all about. It's about giving Zelensky and the others in Ukraine an assurance that if there is a deal, and we haven't talked about territorial swaps and so on yet, we should come on to that, if there is a deal, that is one that can be relied upon to be fair and lasting.
Can we just dig down a little bit more on what this credible deterrence framework would look like? And as we're talking about the different sort of aspects that we could see, we keep hearing this idea about air cover, and perhaps this is an area where the U.S. would be pushing forward the most here. Can you give us some insight into how these negotiations are happening behind closed doors when it comes to what the U.S. would actually supply to a security guarantee to make sure that a potential deal would actually get through?
Well, there's a lot of discussion still going on. There's a coalition of the willing meeting that was co-chaired by the French president and the British prime minister, I think, today. There are military chiefs getting together in Washington. I think there's a lot of the detail of what it really means that has got to be worked out. But we do know from President Zelensky that he would like to have, I think he said, 10 different Patriot missile systems on Ukrainian territory. These are very expensive, but they are super effective. And they are a very important part of the defense of Ukraine against ballistic missiles and other Russian hardware which might be fired there. Then I think other parts of it would be territorial guarantees. The president's talked about something that is Article 5 light. In other words, an attack on one country is an attack on us all. That is to say that if Ukraine was attacked, then the coalition of the willing, if not NATO members themselves, would regard it themselves as duty-bound to come to help Ukraine. But there's an awful lot of detail on this military side that's got to be hammered out, and I'm not sure that President Trump is very clear where he wants it to be, but he has understood that there will not be a deal unless there is something like that, and there is an arrangement whereby Ukraine can have its own credible military deterrent and equipment to withstand any further attacks. Because ultimately, nobody trusts Putin to keep his word. Perhaps President Trump does, but nobody else does. Anyone who's dealt with him knows that, as we saw on the eve of the invasion of Ukraine, he lies through his teeth. So there's got to be something which is pretty strong, pretty credible if the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government are to go along with.
Sir Peter, one thing President Donald Trump has made clear is his desire to move very quickly with this and outlined together with European leaders yesterday a timetable of perhaps a bilateral meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian leaders within 2 weeks and perhaps a trilateral meeting, including him, within 3 weeks. Is that overly optimistic? And what are the risks of moving at this pace?
Well, one of the benefits of having somebody like President Trump in the Oval Office is that he likes to move fast. Look at all the different things that he's done since he became president. Some of them we may like, some of them we may not. But he doesn't hang around. And he's a deal maker, as he likes to remind us regularly. So, and he also would like to see an end to the killing, as would we all. So I think he wants to get on with this. He doesn't think there's any need for a ceasefire, which is what Zelensky wants and what everybody else on the European side would like, and what the Chancellor of Germany and the French President reminded him was a requirement for progress towards some sort of a settlement. He's now moved off that because Putin didn't want to have a ceasefire. He wants to go straight to a settlement. But to do a settlement in very short order, when you're talking about territorial issues and guarantees and Putin's desire, frankly, to dismantle the entire post-Cold War European order, that's going to be very difficult. And that's a real problem. Let's hope that we can move fast. I think everybody would be delighted if there was rapid progress. But there were questions to be answered, such as, what does the president mean by territorial exchanges or territorial swaps? Has anyone seen any sign of the Russians offering land of theirs in exchange for the land of Ukraine that they want to keep for themselves? I don't think we have. All we've seen is that there might just be the possibility of the Russians withdrawing from some little corners of Ukraine that they've already occupied in exchange for getting others. Well, that doesn't sound to me like a very fair deal. I'm not sure that it would to President Zelensky either. So these territorial issues, as well as the military guarantees and the broader political questions that we've touched on, this does take time. But President Trump is a man in a hurry. He went to Alaska. A couple of days later, there was everybody in the Oval Office. We've now got the coalition of the willing talking to each other. We've got military chiefs looking at the military guarantees question. It would be wonderful if we could make early progress, because each day that we speak, there are more people being murdered by Russian missile attacks on Ukraine.
Sir Peter, in just the last 30 seconds that we have with you, I'd love to get your thoughts on what has been a relatively warm relationship between the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Trump throughout this process. What do you make of the evolution of this relationship, considering that the UK was the first to ink a trade deal, for example?
Well, it was, and it started, I think, with a very successful visit to the Oval Office by Keir Starmer. Not everybody was convinced that it would work. You've got President Trump, who was full of a MAGA approach and more protectionist. You've got Keir Starmer, who is a Labour politician, a free trader. How is that going to work out?
Sir Peter, I'm so sorry. We have to leave it there. Peter Westmacott, former
Leave it to a Brit to just keep on talking. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the resveratrol. Resveratrol will help with the health of your mitochondria, boost up the ATP levels. It's an antioxidant. It'll help with youthful gene expression, get rid of cells that are in senescence. So it's a great way as part of a healthcare protocol. It stacks really well with C60, NAD+, ubiquinol, clarity factor. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the resveratrol. Also, what's important is to bring down inflammation, daily detoxify your body, and soak up free radicals. And a great way to do that is to take the heirloom barley. Heirloom barley is a powder. You mix it with soft foods, filtered water, milk, or a smoothie. Take it once a day. Take 1 scoop a day. This is a month's supply. And that's a great way to detoxify your body and bring down inflammation. By bringing down inflammation, you're helping your vascular system, you're helping your immune system, you're helping your brain, you're helping with your joints, your musculature. It'll help you recover after a workout. So please, go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, get the heirloom barley, take it daily. And you can stack it with the resveratrol. So resveratrol helps with the youthful gene expression, and the heirloom barley is helping to detoxify your body and bring down inflammation and soak up free radicals. So please go to my store, use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. The link is in the description of this video and all my videos.
I want to bring in NBC's Gabe Gutierrez covering the White House. NBC's Andrea Mitchell conducted that interview with the Finnish president. And Ben Rhodes served as President Obama's deputy national security advisor. He is also an MSNBC political analyst. So, Andrea, I know that you also asked President Stubb about this meeting between Zelensky and Putin. He seemed to think it was happening. What do we know for sure?
Well, he suggested that it could happen within a week or two, relatively quickly. That the security guarantees, he said, are up to us, not to Russia. I asked him about Russia's immediate rejection from their foreign minister, Lavrov, almost as soon as the meeting broke up, and saying that there could not be any NATO presence. And he said, we've been talking about this among the 30 nations, the coalition of the willing. Chancellor Merz called another meeting for today, a virtual meeting of that group. They've been working on the military possibilities, and that this could happen rather quickly, that the security guarantees are not a decision for Russia, that he said that is up to us. And he takes a very hard line as a country with an 800-mile border with Russia, a relatively new member of NATO, which joined NATO precisely in 2023 in response to Russia's invasion, and has a very strong military. Is a very strong contributor to NATO, and has and keeps purchasing, warplanes and other military equipment. So they are very well armed indeed.
So, Gabe, what is the White House doing right now to put a meeting on the calendar?
Well, Chris, there are active negotiations underway to try and make this happen. But as he suggested, right now we don't have much clarity on all this. Now, yesterday it was very interesting to hear President Trump speaking with French President Emmanuel Macron in hot mic moment, where he talked about the possibility of coming to a deal with Vladimir Putin. Let's listen to that.
Thank you.
Now, critically there, Chris, the president saying that he thinks that Putin wants to make a deal, quote, for me. Many national security analysts would say, well, look, Putin's really only in it to make a deal for himself. But there are many questions about the location and the timing of this potential meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, partly because there are a lot of countries around the world that Vladimir Putin can't simply go to. Of course, the International Criminal Court has indicted Putin. Those are some of the countries right there on your screen that are not part of the ICC: Turkey, Belarus, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. All those are places where there could be some sort of summit between Putin and Zelensky, where Putin would not be arrested. Also interesting, though, President Macron suggesting that perhaps Switzerland could be a potential location for this. Switzerland is part of the ICC, but now is saying that it would grant immunity to Vladimir Putin if he came to the country for any sort of peace conference. But Chris, these are all questions, the timing, the location of all this, that certainly the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, will be pressed about at the White House briefing within the next hour or so.
So, Ben, and you and I have talked about this a lot in the past. Just talking in diplomatic terms is important. Clearly, a lot of talking was done yesterday. We saw the European leaders. We know that phone call took place with Vladimir Putin. So are we in a better place moving forward? And by better place, I mean more likely to be able to achieve peace than we were 24 hours ago.
I mean, it doesn't really feel that way, Chris. I mean, we're in a better place in the sense that it's pretty clear that President Zelensky and European leaders made their case and communicated why we can't just, from the standpoint of the West, capitulate to Putin in this. But there are two big issues that you and I have talked about several times, Chris, that are at the core of any resolution. One is land, one is security guarantees. On the question of territory, it is no clearer today than it was before the Alaska summit what the future of Ukraine's borders would be, or where the front line would freeze in any settlement. Russia wants all of the land that is annexed from Ukraine, which includes land that they don't even occupy. And that is still Putin's position. That was still Putin's position after the Alaska summit. Ukraine obviously doesn't want to cede that territory, nor do they want international recognition that that territory has been ceded. And then on security guarantees, Ukraine wants something that they can take to the bank, that if they make this deal, Russia's not going to reinvade them in a couple of years. The best way is for them to join NATO, and they have an Article 5 collective defense guarantee. Secondary to them would be a physical presence of troops from NATO countries, and this would be that European collection of countries on their territory, because frankly what they believe is if NATO countries are attacked by Russia, that does bring in NATO. Russia absolutely won't agree to that, and they've said that again after this meeting, because that's one of the reasons they say that they fought this war in the first place, to keep NATO off their borders. So look, I'm all for talks, I'm all for diplomacy. It's good to try to figure these things out, but let's be very clear, for all these optics, it's no clearer today than it was before Alaska what the actual deal would be.
So there is, again, let's talk just about that one question, security guarantees. I mean, Zelensky told reporters pretty unequivocally that his understanding there would be security guarantees. But this morning, Donald Trump was on a phone call with Fox News, and he put the onus squarely on Europe to provide it. Let's listen to that.
When it comes to security, they're willing to put people on the ground. We're willing to help them with things, especially probably if you talk about by air, because there's nobody else the kind of stuff we have. There'll be some form of security. It can't be NATO because that's just not something that would ever happen. They couldn't do that. So who would want that? I mean, if you were Russia, who would want to have your enemy, your opponent sitting on your line? You don't do that.
So do you hear in that, Ben, any consensus on the president, Ukraine, Europe, about what security guarantees actually means?
I mean, yes and no, right? So on the yes, from Trump's perspective, it seems like he wants there to be European troops, right? Or he's okay with, maybe he doesn't want it, but he's okay with this idea that the UK, France, Germany, and a collection of European countries will put some troops into Ukraine. And I think what Trump thinks of as security guarantees too is that Ukraine will be allowed to buy our weapons, those kinds of things, right? Now that's not like a concrete security guarantee, but that's an insurance policy for Ukraine. Now, here's where the no comes in. Those troops, what happens if they're attacked by Russia? What happens if Russia reinvades? They're NATO countries, right? Does NATO come to the assistance of those troops? Those troops are in Ukraine. They usually depend on kind of a NATO logistics and supply chain, right? To kind of rearm themselves, to train themselves, right? What is the U.S. participation in that? What is the NATO participation in that? The NATO Secretary General is in these discussions, right? Clearly these are issues. Vladimir Putin knows this. He's not going to make a deal just to give Donald Trump like a good news cycle here. He doesn't want any non-Ukrainian troops on Ukrainian soil. And so this is a huge gap here. Now, one way to settle it is just to say, as Chancellor Merz says, well, we're not going to seek Putin's permission. But Putin knows that, right? And so this is the question. When you get down to the brass tacks of what does a final deal look like, you have to deal with these things. Otherwise, what you're looking at is kind of a frozen conflict. Now, I think the Europeans would like there to be a ceasefire before you even have these final details hammered out. But Putin doesn't want that. And so that's why we're in this this ambiguous state where Putin can just keep pressing his advantage on that front line while all these talks go on and without a ceasefire.
Well, Andrew, in fact, you talked to the president of Finland about that exact topic, about a ceasefire. Let me play that and I'll get you on the other side.
This is Bree. She went from idea to paying customers in 48 hours. No coding, no teams, no all-nighters fueled by energy drinks. While most people spend months planning and preparing, Bree had a different approach. She had something most entrepreneurs don't, an AI employee that could execute her vision. Day one, her AI wrote her website copy and found potential leads. Day two, cold outreach emails were drafted, tested, and sent to 500 prospects. Day three, follow-up emails were sent, and her first sales calls were booked. All of us should watch Netflix. Her AI.
My personal preference would be to have a ceasefire or call it a truce, because that would stop the killing. And usually in these types of negotiations, you first have a ceasefire and then you actually have the peace negotiations. But again, we have to live with the realities that we have.
All of us are very clear that we want to stop the killings as soon as possible. You can call it a ceasefire, you can call it a truce, an armistice, but we want to stop these killings.
So in your conversations, Andrea, and I know they're wide-ranging, is there any level of feeling, any level of belief that they could come to, whatever you call it, but some sort of ceasefire?
The ceasefire is clearly what the Europeans have wanted. They were disappointed, but they quieted that disappointment in order to get through yesterday's meetings and to support Zelensky and also support NATO unity with the United States because of the things that Donald Trump has said in the past, where he has even threatened if European nations didn't ante up to what he claims are dues, which are not, they're just contributions to NATO. And he said, well, if they don't contribute up to the 5%, then Russia can do whatever the hell they want with them. I mean, he has repeatedly even questioned the Article 5, charter obligation of NATO membership. So they had to navigate this very closely. I think that there are ways, as Ben well knows as a negotiator, in when he was doing negotiations with Iran and other very complex negotiations, Cuba and the United States, to work around it. There is talk of a buffer zone, some sort of an armistice, not an end as they continue to negotiate, but some kind of no man's land, if you will, like North Korea, a frozen conflict, so be it, but that it would stop the killing. And there is talk, what President Stubbs said, of getting to the ceasefire before the third, in between the second and the third of the meetings, the bilateral and the trilateral, when President Trump would join. And so getting the ceasefire at least on the table before the end of the talks with Vladimir Putin, but getting some kind of commitment from Russia. So there are different modalities, and what sounds so naive out of all of this is to even suggest that something as complex as land swaps and boundaries could be negotiated in a couple of meetings. President Stubb, by the way, suggested Geneva, and Switzerland today said that they would give immunity to Vladimir Putin to travel to Switzerland. There have been other high-level meetings, President Clinton meeting with Hafez al-Assad, that I attended back in the 90s, when he was not on the terror list, but was not considered an ally, certainly. So there are neutral meetings that could be held in Switzerland, and that could be one of the options.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Gladiator Barley. The Gladiator Barley will help to build strength, build muscle, they'll detoxify your body, bring down inflammation, and soak up free radicals with superoxide dismutase. It's a powder, it's a high-density protein. You take it every day, do resistance training. Stacks well with Myotrol and Boomer Boost. Now, Boomer Boost has 68 nutrients. It has a very comprehensive profile. It's a powder. You mix it with soft foods, filtered water, milk, or a smoothie. Take it every day. It focuses on multiple systems. It focuses on your heart and your vascular system, your brain function, your musculature. It helps increase energy levels, boosts up your metabolism. It's a great way to lose weight if you want to lose weight. If you want to lose weight, take Boomer Boost with a soft food like yogurt or hummus, either for breakfast or for lunch, and then do a normal balanced meal for the other 2 meals for your day. Do some calorie restriction because you're trying to lose weight. You'll have a steady burn of energy throughout the whole day. And over time, you're going to lose weight safely. And if you continue that and you maintain that weight loss, what's going to happen is your adipose tissue will start to die off. See, a lot of people don't realize that you have fat cells, adipose cells, and they can swell up with triglycerides. Now, when you lose weight, you're burning off those triglycerides, but the cell is still there. So that's the reason why people can go into a yo-yo diet, and they gain the weight really quick. It takes 5 years of a change of lifestyle to permanently lose weight. So this is a great way to safely lose weight. You do some resistance training, some cardio, balancing exercises, stretching exercises. You'll have all the nutrients you need. And when you apply that, you're going to safely lose weight, and you're changing your lifestyle. You're eating properly, you're sleeping better, you're bringing down inflammation, and you're doing the 4 modalities of exercise. These are all very important in terms of lifestyle change. Make sure you drink filtered water and stay away from processed foods. Eat more vegetables, more protein. When you do that, over that 5-year period, you are going to permanently lose that weight, right? But a lot of people, they think, oh, they just lost the weight and it's done. No, it takes 5 years. 5 years to get rid of the adipose tissue, unless you do liposuction. So take the Boomer Boost. It's a great way to lose weight, control your A1C levels. Now, let's say you're at a good BMI level. You can benefit from Boomer Boost too. You just maintain your calorie intake and mix it with one of your meals. And that's what I do. I take it every day. You could stack it with either Gladiator barley or heirloom barley for max benefit. Now, with the Boomer Boost with the Gladiator barley is a great way to help build more muscle, bring down that inflammation, detoxify your body. But you can do the same thing with the heirloom barley. It's just heirloom barley isn't really designed for building muscle. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, get the Boomer Boost and the Gladiator barley. This is the stack that I prefer to do with the Myotrol. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the great supplements I offer. Now, just to reiterate what the protocol is and then how you can stack on top of that. So I went over all these different stacks throughout the broadcast. The foundational piece is the complete multivitamin with the probiotic. The 4 pillars on top of that foundation are taking Max 35, Max 14, or even Cleanse to boost up the immune system. The second pillar is the C60 to soak up free radicals. The third pillar, take turmeric, ashwagandha, and lignans to help with your cardiovascular health and your immune system. And the fourth pillar, the Boomer Boost, to rev up the metabolism and to increase your energy levels. That's a very powerful anti-aging protocol, longevity protocol. And that way you have more vitality. You can add stuff to that, like the resveratrol or the digestive enzyme complex. So there's lots of ways to customize this for you. These are supplements that I take every day. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get healthy. It's a holistic approach. It's the proper supplementation and stack, proper diet, proper exercise, proper sleep, learn new things, talk to people, read, write, filter your water, stay away from processed foods, and you'll get healthy. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.